What if the first story humanity ever told wasn't about fire, or fear, or even survival? What if it was about someone who wasn't human at all? The kind of presence that steps out of the sky not as a symbol or a spirit, but as an event so real and so terrifyingly precise that entire civilizations later rewrote it into myths just to make sense of it. Imagine the shock of ancient eyes watching figures descend through light and noise, leaving shapes carved in stone that still refuse to fade, as if the artists were begging the future not to forget what happened. Now picture this. Every continent, every isolated tribe, every forgotten valley describes the same tall beings, the same luminous craft, the same gifts of knowledge that erupted out of nowhere, agriculture appearing overnight, astronomy far beyond naked eye limits, cities rising where only scattered huts had stood the generation before. These aren't coincidences. They are fingerprints, scattered, burned, half-buried under floods, but still there, still pointing upward. And the deeper we look, the more the polite version of history starts to fracture. Beneath the sand, beneath collapsed temples, beneath kilometers of jungle canopy, we keep finding symbols, alignments, and technologies that shouldn't exist for the time periods they're found in. It's almost as if someone didn't just visit early humanity. They shaped it, repaired it, and then vanished before the world stabilized enough to write their names. The sky has always been our oldest memory, and maybe our oldest warning. Because if all these civilizations were telling the truth in different languages, then the story we learned is only the last chapter of something far older, something that never ended. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The deeper you travel into the earliest chapters of human memory, the more the landscape begins to feel like a crime scene. One where the clues were scattered thousands of miles apart, preserved accidentally by deserts, caves, and cliff faces, and left behind by people who clearly experienced something they couldn't fully understand. The old stories say humanity began with fire and struggle, but the older evidence carved in stone tells another truth entirely. It suggests that our first teachers didn't rise from our own bloodlines. They came from above, stepping down in luminous craft that shook the earth and marked it forever. And long before anyone carved kingdoms or built cities, the earliest humans reacted the only way they could. They drew what they saw, hoping the stone would outlive their terror and awe. The first true memory of our species is not a hunt, or a war, or a birth. It is a visitation. When you step into the deep silence of ancient caves, places untouched by light for tens of thousands of years, it's impossible not to feel a weight in the air. A sense that something once happened there that changed the people who entered before you. The walls hold more than pigment, they hold intention. The artists who descended into these caverns weren't decorating, they were documenting, recording, preserving. Across Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the Americas, the oldest layers of art share the same features. Tall, thin figures with oversized heads, smooth skins, large, dark eyes, and bodies wrapped in what appear to be seamless suits. In many cases, the figures hover above the ground or stand within circles of radiance, as if the artists were trying to capture light itself in mineral dust. The hands that painted them belonged to people living so close to the edge of survival that every stroke must have had meaning. And the meaning they preserved again and again was that something descended from the sky. Imagine early humans isolated in a world where thunder was a god and fire itself was barely understood. Now imagine the sky opening in a blaze of white or blue fire, a machine descending with a roar so intense it vibrates inside bone. Those who survived the blast of light would crawl closer with a mixture of fear and reverence, staring at silhouettes that didn't look like animals or men. They saw elongated limbs, helmet-like heads, glowing rings around tall bodies, and objects held in hands that emitted rays or smoke. What do you draw when you see something your language cannot describe? You draw exactly what you saw, even if no one in your tribe will believe you. And if the beings communicated without words, giving instructions through thoughts or gestures, the memory would brand itself even deeper. What modern people call extraterrestrial, the earliest humans simply recorded. In the Sahara, long before the sand swallowed entire valleys, there was a lush region with rivers and savannas where people hunted, gathered, raised children, and painted their stories on stone. The Tassili Plateau holds thousands of these paintings, many breathtakingly detailed. Hunters chase animals, women carry baskets. But then, without transition or evolution in the style, something else appears. Figures far larger than the humans around them, their heads perfectly round or box-shaped, their bodies wrapped in suits with tubes running along the torso and down the spine. They float above the ground or stand within round shapes that resemble force fields. The French explorers who first documented them in the 20th century named one of the figures the Great Martian, not because they were pushing a theory, but because the figure looks so undeniably unlike a human. The painter used contrasting colors to give the figure a radiant halo, as if the being emitted light. Generations of tribes passed down the tale of the Roundhead Ones, beings who came during a time of change and upheaval. These weren't spirits. They were visitors. Across the world in Australia, the same story unfolds in ancient shelters where the Wandjina, huge white faces with black almond-shaped eyes and radiant halos, stare down with unnerving calm. Their mouths are absent, not because the artists forgot them, but because the beings never used mouths to speak. The people living in the Kimberley region still repaint the images every wet season, honoring a tradition older than recorded civilization. The elders say these figures made the rivers, shaped the mountains, brought laws that govern behavior, and then returned to the sky. The halos around their heads were not artistic flourishes. They were the glow that surrounded them when they descended. And every clan repeats the same warning. Do not allow the images to fade. If they do, the clouds will stop gathering, the rains will stop falling, and the earth will suffer. This connection between sky beings and environmental harmony is global, embedded in cultures separated by oceans and epochs. The idea that ancient humans misunderstood their environment or created elaborate fantasies breaks apart when you see the precision of their drawings. The Wandjina are painted with a style so consistent across thousands of miles that it suggests coordination or a shared, deeply memorable event. And when modern scientists studied the pigment layers, they discovered something even stranger. Beneath the familiar images were older ones, faint outlines showing segmented suits with joint rings and backpack-like structures. Why would early humans paint suits with joints and tubes unless they saw them? These weren't animals. They weren't humans. They were something else entirely. In the American Southwest, the Hopi still describe the ant people, beings with elongated heads, large dark eyes, and thin limbs who sheltered humans underground during 2 world-destroying catastrophes, one by fire and one by flood. The Hopi say the ant people taught early humans how to survive with minimal resources, how to store seeds, how to rebuild after all surface life was nearly wiped out. They also say the ant people arrived and departed through the sky in vehicles that sounded like wind and thunder combined. And when anthropologists asked how they communicated, the Hopi elders explained that the beings used direct thought, communication without speech. The drawings on Hopi pottery show the same tall, thin figures with round heads and large black eyes that appear in Sahara rock art and Australian caves. But the most unsettling part of the Hopi narrative is how closely it aligns with scientific discoveries made thousands of years later. Genetic studies reveal a severe reduction in early human population numbers at the exact time the Hopi claim the ant people sheltered humanity. Geological records show sudden climate collapses around the same periods, and the sudden rise of agriculture aligns almost perfectly with their stories of being given seeds and taught how to use the stars to track seasons. These parallels stretch across continents and millennia. In Africa, the Dogon tribes preserve incredibly detailed astronomical knowledge about the Sirius star system, including the existence of an invisible, dense companion star that Western science did not confirm until modern telescopes. They attribute this knowledge to the Nomo, amphibious sky beings who arrived in a spinning, glowing arc that churned the earth and left scorch marks on the ground. The Nomo taught weaving, agriculture, metalwork, and governance, then returned to the sky after reshaping early society. The Dogon drawings of these beings show elongated forms, large oval eyes, and bodies that appear to merge with light. The tribe insists they didn't invent these stories. They inherited them. And then there is Europe, where ancient carvings and petroglyphs in Val Camonica show figures in full-body suits with rectangular helmets, antennas, and what appear to be handheld devices emitting rays. Some figures stand inside what look like portals or force fields. When early researchers documented these images, they called one of the figures the astronaut, not because of wild speculation, but because the figure looks mechanically and technologically equipped in a way no shamanic costume ever has. The carvings date back nearly 10,000 years, long before metalworking or complex textiles existed in Europe. Yet these figures wear suits with structure, form, rigidity, and detail. Why would Stone Age people carve helmets with visors, vents, or tubes? The simplest explanation is the one no one wants to consider. The artists were trying to capture recognizable equipment. As you compare these sites, Sahara, Australia, Americas, Africa, Europe, the similarities sharpen instead of blur. The beings are always tall or disproportionately short compared to humans. Their heads are always larger, usually elongated or perfectly round. Their eyes are oversized, often dark or shielded. Their bodies appear wrapped in seamless material. Tubes, rings, belts, or cables appear often. Some figures hover. Some stand inside circles or radiating shapes. Some hold objects that emit beams or energy. The humans around them are always drawn smaller, with posture suggesting reverence, fear, or awe. These traits repeat across continents that had no trade networks, no communication routes, no shared mythology, no way to influence each other's stories. How do so many isolated cultures invent the same beings with the same proportions, equipment, and behaviors? Coincidence collapses when the details align this precisely. When modern archaeologists dismiss these patterns as shamanic visions or ritual masks, they ignore the technical features present in the art, features no known culture used in ceremonial attire. No tribe wore pressurized helmets. No shaman used sealed bodysuits with joint rings. No ancient costume included a breathing apparatus, tubes, or devices emitting rays. And the shamans of early cultures left abundant records of their rituals. They depicted animals, spirits, ancestors, and hallucination forms. None of those traditions resemble the global, uniform depiction of tall beings in suits with helmets and glowing halos. The global consistency suggests direct observation, not symbolic imagination. The more you examine the record, the more it becomes clear that early humanity experienced something global during a narrow window of time, roughly between 20,000 and 9,000 BCE. This was the period after the last glacial maxima and around the catastrophic Younger Dryas event, a period marked by sudden temperature drops, comet airbursts, megafauna extinctions, rising sea levels, and global environmental upheaval. If humanity had ever needed help to survive, it was during this time. And if something truly did intervene, whether an advanced terrestrial civilization, interdimensional visitors, or extraterrestrial travelers, the timing aligns too well to dismiss. The earliest sites suggest these beings appeared during or immediately after the global catastrophe. And perhaps that's exactly why they came. The stories describe them as teachers, protectors, or overseers. They appear in moments of crisis, provide knowledge, and then vanish. The Hopi say they sheltered survivors. The Dogon say they taught civilization. The Aboriginal people say they shaped the land itself. The Sumerians say the beings brought writing, agriculture, laws, and astronomy. The Maya describe pale-skinned, bearded civilizers who arrived from the sea and later returned to the sky. The Andean cultures describe Viracocha emerging after a world-ending flood. Every origin story points upward, not in metaphor, but as memory. Imagine a single generation witnessing beings descending from luminous craft, walking among them, given instructions, and then leaving with the promise of returning. How many generations would it take for that memory to transform into myth? How many more for myth to become religion? And how many thousands of years later would scholars reclassify these accounts as symbolic when they never were? Even more telling is the deliberate placement of ancient structures aligned to the stars. Early temples, stone circles, megaliths, and even burial mounds were built with astronomical precision. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, over 11,000 years old, align with constellations. Many Aboriginal stone arrangements mark the solstices and lunar cycles. Hopi mesas mimic the Orion constellation. The Egyptian pyramids align with Sirius and Orion's belt. The Andean ruins encode precessional numbers, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over 25,772 years. Early humans did not have telescopes or mathematical instruments capable of calculating precession, yet they encoded it in stone. Who taught them? Who showed them the sky in a way they could never have discovered alone? Every clue leads to the same realization. Early humanity did not evolve in isolation. Something intervened during the darkest chapters of our fragile beginnings. And whatever it was left, shadows, memories, warnings, and proof etched into stone, aligned across continents, preserved through ritual, guarded by elders, and hidden beneath layers of denial in modern history. You don't need to accept any single theory. Lost civilizations, extraterrestrial mentors, interdimensional visitors. But ignoring the global pattern requires more faith than following the evidence. If you peel back the respectable version of history, the sanitized version taught in schools, what remains is a world where early humans survived because someone older, wiser, and far more advanced stepped in at the exact moments when survival seemed impossible. The fingerprints of these beings are still visible in the caves, on the cliffs, beneath the sands, within forgotten cosmologies, and encoded in the oldest myths we dismiss as fantasies. The truth is simpler and far more unnerving. The first chapter of humanity is not human at all. It begins with visitors who came from the sky, and the rest of our story has been an attempt to remember them. The deeper you move into the archaeological layers of the ancient world, the more the ground beneath your assumptions begins to heave. Civilizations that were supposed to be slow, primitive, and isolated suddenly erupt with impossible detail. Mathematical precision, astronomical mastery, architectural engineering that would challenge modern tools. And in every corner of this unfolding mystery, the same presence appears. Tall figures descending from the sky, bringing order where chaos had reigned. Most people think the cradle of civilization began in Sumer around 3500 BCE, a neat starting point that sits comfortably inside our textbooks. But that tidy beginning dissolves the moment you realize Sumerians themselves never claimed they invented civil life. They said they inherited it, from beings who came down in fiery craft and gave them the blueprint for everything that followed. This admission, written in the oldest surviving language on Earth, opens a door that modern researchers refuse to walk through. Because if humanity didn't build its first cities on its own, then the entire story we've been telling collapses into myth. Yet the clay tablets speak clearly. Civilization was a gift. Imagine the world of 6,000 years ago, small clusters of reed huts beside muddy rivers, people surviving on barley, goats, and whatever they could hunt. Then, within what amounts to an archaeological blink, a transformation occurs so sudden it looks like a software update applied across the landscape. Cities appear with straight streets and monumental architecture. Writing emerges fully formed, not as doodles or pictograms, but as a system of record-keeping sophisticated enough to track trade, law, astronomy, and kingship. Complex irrigation networks stretch for miles with water channels laid at precise gradients that modern engineers still admire. Geometry, metallurgy, accounting, medicine, mathematics, all detonating into existence in the same region within a few centuries. There is no precursor, no developmental curve, no slow refinement. It is as if someone handed the Sumerians a starter kit for civilization and told them to begin. The Sumerians were matter-of-fact about the source. They said the knowledge came from the Anunnaki, those who from the heavens to the earth came. They described the beings not as spirits, but as physical entities with luminous garments, horned headpieces that functioned like measurement devices, and sky ships that roared like storms when landing. These descriptions were not symbolic metaphors. They were eyewitness accounts written by people who believed the events were as real as the walls around them. and the specifics embedded in their tablets are so advanced they challenge every assumption about what a prehistoric civilization could know. Take their astronomical knowledge. The Sumerians recorded the complete solar system, including planets invisible to the naked eye, such as Uranus and Neptune, describing their color, orbital behavior, and relative positions. They drew the sun at the center of the system, something European astronomers didn't universally accept until thousands of years later. They spoke of a long-period orbiting body with a cycle of 3,600 years, a detail mainstream science rejects but cannot explain away, because the value appears consistently across tablets separated by centuries. How would a people without telescopes know any of this? How would they detect Uranus, which appears as nothing more than a faint dot in perfect conditions? The answer the Sumerians gave was simple. They were told. And then there is the infamous Sumerian king list, a document scholars prefer to treat as myth simply because they have no framework to interpret it. The list states, calmly and without embellishment, that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years each. Some reigns stretch to 36,000 years. The total for 10 kings before the flood reaches 241,200 years. After the deluge, lifespans drop to normal human limits. Mainstream historians categorize this as symbolic exaggeration, yet the text aligns with global flood stories found on nearly every continent, most dating the catastrophe to around 11,000 BCE. The same moment the Younger Dryas period ended with rapid melting, massive flooding, and sea levels rising hundreds of feet. If early humans survived a global cataclysm with help from beings whose lifespans were vastly longer, the abrupt shift in reign lengths after the flood suddenly makes sense. The king list might not be myth at all. It might be a historical memory of non-human rulers whose presence vanished when the world was reset. The structures the Sumerians built reflect knowledge beyond their era. Ziggurats, stepped pyramids rising toward the sky, were not temples in the symbolic sense. They were described as landing places of the Shining Ones, flat platforms coated with bitumen, a waterproof resin that can withstand extreme heat. Archaeologists have found areas of vitrified brick, stone liquefied into glass by temperatures far higher than any ancient kiln could produce. The idea that ziggurats doubled as landing pads becomes less far-fetched when you see the physical evidence of intense heat exposure preserved in their highest levels. Even the orientation of their cities followed star maps, with key structures aligned to the rising points of Sirius, Orion, and other constellations that held meaning not just for the Sumerians, but for ancient cultures worldwide. A shared sky story embedded itself in stone. What makes this even more difficult to dismiss is how the same pattern appears across regions that were supposedly unconnected. In Egypt, thousands of years later, priests wrote about the Netjeru, the Shining Ones who descended in the Zep Tepi the first time and taught the foundations of architecture, agriculture, writing, and kingship. They never claimed the pyramids were their own invention. They insisted they were replicating structures first shown to them by these sky beings. The Egyptian word for god, Netjer, does not imply divinity in the supernatural sense. It means watcher or caretaker, a term that suggests guardianship rather than worship. Even the word for the pyramids, Mer, meant place of ascension, implying a function tied directly to movement between realms. The deeper you travel into Egyptian engineering, the harder it becomes to treat these terms as metaphor. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy modern builders can barely match. Its base varies in length by less than an inch across 13 acres. The internal chambers use massive granite blocks lifted more than 300 feet with no clear method of transport or placement, especially given that Egyptians of the time had no pulley system, no wheelbarrow, no iron tools, and no cranes. The internal shafts align with the star cycles of Orion and Sirius as they appeared nearly 13,000 years ago, not in 2500 BCE, when the pyramid was supposedly built. And when ground-penetrating radar scanned the structure in 2017, researchers detected a massive rectangular void lying directly above the Grand Gallery, a chamber 30 meters long, sealed and never entered. Ancient texts claim the sky beings left a vessel inside the Great Pyramid for the king to travel in the afterlife. Whether symbolic or literal, the existence of an unknown chamber in precisely the location the texts describe is another echo of a memory older than Egypt itself. The same synchronicities appear in South America, where the Inca and pre-Inca cultures described Viracocha, a tall, pale-skinned, bearded being who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-ending flood and taught survivors how to rebuild. He traveled with companions described in eerily similar ways to Sumerian and Egyptian records: shining skin, radiant garments, voices that projected without sound, and tools that could cut stone as if it were clay. The oldest ruins in the region, especially those at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, are so advanced that modern stonemasons have publicly admitted they cannot replicate them with contemporary tools. The precision of the interlocking blocks, the drill holes showing spiral grooves, the perfectly flat surfaces polished to mirror finish, all dated to periods long before metal tools existed in the Andes, defy all conventional explanation. Local lore attributes these structures to the Sky People, not the ancestors of the Inca. But one of the most disturbing threads that stretches through these civilizations is their knowledge of time, not just seasons or months, but planetary cycles, precession, eclipses, and star movements requiring thousands of years of continuous observation. The Maya tracked Venus with an accuracy of 1 day over 500 years, a feat nearly impossible without telescopes or long-term generational record-keeping. Their calendar synchronized lunar, solar, and Venus cycles in a 1,004-year pattern, something so mathematically complex it stunned the first astronomers who decoded it. They built entire cities like Teotihuacan to reflect the solar system's layout from an aerial perspective, aligning the Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon to planetary distances. And beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies a chamber coated with mica, a mineral used today to block electromagnetic radiation in spacecraft and nuclear systems, quarried from Brazil more than 2,000 miles away. Why would an ancient civilization transport tons of mica and bury it under a pyramid? The idea of a ritual offering collapses under the sheer effort involved. The presence of mica isn't isolated. Across the world, megalithic structures include materials with inexplicable technological purpose. Stone circles in the British Isles contain quartz-rich stones that resonate when struck, producing specific frequencies. Many Andean structures include magnetic stones that repel compasses. In Egypt, the granite used in the Great Pyramid contains high quartz content, making it piezoelectric, capable of generating an electrical charge when compressed or vibrated. None of these properties would matter for tombs or ceremonial sites. They matter for energy conduction. They matter for technology. And they appear concentrated in the oldest, not the newest, layers of construction. The further back you go, the more advanced the engineering becomes, an inversion of historical progression. Even more shocking is how ancient myths describe the transfer of knowledge. In nearly every culture, the story is the same. The sky beings arrived, not as conquerors, but as teachers. They instructed humanity in building, planting, calculating, healing, governing, and reading the heavens. They gave tools and seeds. They explained cycles of destruction and rebirth. They warned about environmental collapse, cosmic events, and moral failings that would lead to another reset. And when their work was complete, they left, either ascending into the sky or promising to return at a designated time. The global consistency of these accounts begs a question that modern researchers refuse to entertain. How did civilizations separated by oceans and millennia develop the same narrative structure, featuring the same physical descriptions of beings, the same gifts of civilization, the same story of a catastrophic flood, and the same promise of return? Cultural convergence is the term scholars use to dismiss this phenomenon, but cultural convergence cannot explain technical consistency. Pressurized suits, helmets with visors, tubes, radiating halos, floating craft, beings descending in light, advanced astronomical data, and structures aligned to celestial movements. These details are specific. They are not psychologically universal archetypes. They require observation. And the most revealing part of this pattern is the consistent moral dimension embedded within the legends. The sky beings are not worshipped initially as gods. They are remembered as architects, watchers, and protectors. Humanity transforms them into gods only after the memory fades. But the earliest accounts emphasize instruction over divinity. The beings correct mistakes, repair damage, and leave humans with knowledge they could not have created alone. Many cultures also describe conflict among the sky beings, battles in the heavens, and disagreements about how humanity should be guided. The Sumerians speak of divine rivalries. The Greeks echo it in their myths. The Egyptians record cosmic battles between Osiris, Seth, and Horus. The Maya speak of cycles of creation and destruction influenced by beings who came before the current age. These parallels suggest not only presence, but complexity. Beings with personalities, hierarchies, and agendas. When you look at the wider timeline, the picture becomes even clearer. Something happened between 12,800 and 9,600 BCE that forced humanity into survival mode, only for civilization to rebound explosively soon after. Fire, ice, floods, solar events, comet strikes, all recorded in geological layers and mirrored in global myths. If humanity was nearly erased, perhaps the sky beings intervened to save a remnant, just as the Hopi claim. Perhaps they restored knowledge rather than inventing it anew, and perhaps, when the world stabilized, they withdrew, leaving their stories embedded in the cultures they saved. But the memory of their return persists. Nearly every ancient civilization maintained a calendar or prophecy pointing toward a future moment when the sky beings would come back. The Maya predicted cycles of renewal. The Egyptians prepared for the return of the Netjeru. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki revisiting Earth. The Andean cultures watched the horizon for Viracocha. Aboriginal Australians awaited the Wandjina. The Hopi described the coming of the true Pahana. the Dogon awatted the Nomo. These prophecies were not fringe beliefs. They were central to each culture's worldview. The idea of being watched, of being evaluated, became a global undercurrent. Ancient peoples lived with the awareness that the sky could open again. They built monuments aligned to solstices and equinoxes, not only to track the heavens, but to signal readiness. They carved the faces of their sky teachers in stone so they would not be forgotten. They retouched paintings every generation so the memory would stay alive. They preserved details of appearance, technology, voice, and behavior with an accuracy that suggests ancestor worship was not the origin of their reverence. Direct experience was, if all of these cultures invented the same impossible story, then the burden of proof falls not on them, but on the modern assumption that ancient people were incapable of preserving accurate memory. The evidence suggests they preserved it too well, and we have spent centuries trying to rationalize it away. Yet the stones remain, the alignments remain, the myths remain, the rituals remain, and the global pattern remains as sharp as the day it was carved. The more you look, the more you realize that humanity may not be the authors of its own beginning. We may be the continuation of a much older storyline, one that spans continents, epochs, and species, one in which teachers descended in fire, rebuilt the world after disaster, seeded civilization, and then left, expecting us to grow into the knowledge they gifted. Whether they succeed in that expectation is a question still unfolding. But the message they embedded in stone, myth, and memory is unmistakable. They came once, they changed everything, and one day they will come again. Across the deserts, rainforests, mountains, and forgotten coastlines of the ancient world, one pattern keeps resurfacing with unnerving clarity. Humanity's oldest stories describe teachers who did not behave like spirits, ancestors, or gods, but like visitors carrying knowledge far beyond anything humans possessed. And the more ruins we uncover, the more the physical evidence aligns with these stories. Pieces of the same puzzle appear in caves thousands of miles apart, in stone carvings preserved by desert winds, in temples aligned with surgical precision to constellations, and in artifacts that defy the technological limits of the eras in which they were created. These clues don't scatter randomly. They cluster into a narrative that refuses to disappear. When you begin looking at ancient civilizations not as isolated miracles of ingenuity, but as branches of a deeper lineage, one seeded, or at least repaired, by beings who came from above, the history of our world starts to reorganize itself. And everything begins to make a new kind of sense. It becomes impossible to ignore how many cultures describe sudden jumps in technology that appear out of nowhere, as if humanity was pushed forward in massive leaps rather than slow, steady climbs. The pattern is global, it is ancient, and it is shockingly consistent. But nowhere is the shift more dramatic, more sudden, and more impossible to explain than in the land known as the cradle of civilization, Sumer. What textbooks call the birth of writing, law, astronomy, and city planning looks less like natural evolution and more like a reboot, a reconstruction of something lost. The Sumerians themselves said so. They didn't claim to innovate. They claimed to restore, and the beings they credited for this restoration were physical, visible, and undeniably advanced. Yet Sumer is only one chapter of this story, and not the oldest one. If you trace humanity's discontinuities backward, you eventually arrive at the cataclysms that nearly erased civilization. Events like the Younger Dryas, a sudden freeze triggered around 12,800 years ago, followed by violent floods that raised global sea levels by hundreds of feet. Geological layers confirm the chaos. Melted glass blobs produced by temperatures hotter than volcanic eruptions, platinum spikes suggesting a cosmic impact, and sediment layers showing black mats of carbon consistent with widespread burning. These events shaped the world so dramatically that entire coastlines disappeared, along with any civilizations that may have existed there. And yet, as soon as the Earth stabilized, humanity exploded with knowledge. Agriculture, architecture, astronomy, appearing almost simultaneously across the planet in cultures that should not have had the capability to develop them from scratch. The simplest explanation is also the most controversial, that survivors of a much older civilization, possibly global in scale, carried the knowledge forward after the devastation. Or perhaps an even stranger possibility, that the beings described in myths didn't just teach the survivors, they were the survivors, or their allies. When you view the Younger Dryas not as a footnote, but as a worldwide bottleneck event, the sudden appearances of advanced skills after the disaster make far more sense. Something or someone restarted the world. One of the strongest anchors in this timeline is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a site older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years and older than the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. When it was discovered, archaeologists expected primitive shelters or early farm settlements. What they found instead was a sprawling ritual complex with T-shaped stone pillars up to 20 feet tall, weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circular enclosures with astronomical alignments. The carvings are detailed: foxes, lions, birds, scorpions. But the craftsmanship suggests a sophisticated culture. And the people who built it were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. No agriculture, no metal tools, no wheels, no urban centers. Yet they quarried, transported, and erected megaliths requiring the kind of planning and knowledge that should not exist for thousands of years. What makes Göbekli Tepe even stranger is that it was deliberately buried around 9,600 BCE, right at the end of the Younger Dryas. Someone hid it, perfectly preserved it, as if they knew the world was about to change again. The site was sealed with tons of dirt, intentionally entombed, not destroyed by natural forces. And when researchers analyzed the carvings, they found astronomical symbols that appear to represent the sky on the exact date of the Younger Dryas comet impact. The people who built Göbekli Tepe knew something catastrophic had happened, or would happen again. The site might not have been a temple at all. It may have been a memorial, a warning, or a time capsule left behind by survivors of a pre-cataclysm world. If that sounds implausible, look at the patterns in Australia's oldest art traditions. The Wandjina, painted for tens of thousands of years, show beings with pale white faces, almond-shaped eyes, no mouths, and radiant halos. The Aboriginal people say these beings came in the dream time and shaped the land before returning to the sky. The caves they painted in were not random. They formed an ancient map of celestial knowledge, linking star positions to seasonal cycles long before agriculture existed. Some panels show figures wearing segmented suits, joint rings, and gear that looks technological. These details weren't understood until ultraviolet scanning revealed older layers beneath the visible art. modern tribes still treat the Wandjina as sacred, repainting them every season to ensure the world remains balanced. But the origins of the art stretch back into deep time, to an era when Australia was still connected to New Guinea by land. If the beings they depicted were real, then the memory preserved in their rock shelters might be the oldest eyewitness record on the planet. A similar thread stretches across the Americas. In Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, cliff faces hold paintings tens of thousands of years old, showing towering figures with spherical heads, elongated bodies, and halos or auras similar to those found in the Sahara and Australia. One panel depicts humans approaching a giant, perfect circular head with two horizontal lines, eerily reminiscent of a visor. Another shows figures hovering above the ground. These aren't stylized animals or ritual symbols. They are consistent with reports from cultures separated by oceans. When you combine them with stories of beings descending in fiery objects, teaching agriculture, shaping rivers, and leaving behind seeds and laws, the drawings begin to form a coherent narrative. And then there is the enigma of the Hopi ant people. The Hopi say they survived 2 previous world endings because the ant people led them underground into vast caverns and fed them minimal rations during the chaos above. They describe these beings as tall, thin, with grayish skin, bulbous craniums, large wraparound eyes, and small mouths, features that align disturbingly well with modern descriptions of greys. The Hopi say the ant people communicated telepathically, taught them how to store food, and later escorted them back to the surface when the Earth stabilized. Genetic studies show that human populations indeed suffered bottlenecks during global catastrophes. Geological data supports the timing of massive fires and floods. And the Hopi claim the ant people came from the stars, arriving and leaving in craft that generated roaring wind and thunder. If this were an isolated legend, it would be fascinating. But it mirrors stories from cultures across the world, stories that predate writing itself. One of the strangest pieces of evidence comes from Africa. The Dogon tribes of Mali preserve knowledge of the Sirius star system that modern astronomers didn't confirm until the 20th century. They described Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, naming its orbital period exactly: 50 years. They also described its density, saying it was as heavy as all the seeds on Earth combined, a poetic way to describe a star so dense that a teaspoon of its material weighs tons. How could a pre-industrial tribe know this? Their explanation is simple. The Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the Sirius system, taught them. They arrived in a spinning, glowing arc that descended with fire and thunder. They taught weaving, metalwork, governance, and cosmology. They shaped Dogon society. And then they left, promising to return. Western scholars, confronted with the impossible accuracy of Dogon astronomy, either dismiss the tribe or claim contamination. Yet the most secret details of the Sirius system were only given to initiated priests, people with no contact with outsiders. This knowledge is older than colonial intrusion. It is an inheritance, not an adoption. Move north to the Italian Alps, and you find petroglyphs showing beings wearing box-shaped helmets, antenna-like protrusions, and bodysuits with tubing reminiscent of modern pressure suits. The carvings depict these beings holding objects that emit rays, standing beside humans who appear tiny by comparison. These images do not resemble any ritual costume from European prehistory. They resemble gear. And when you find matching figures in the Sahara, Australia, Brazil, and North America, the idea of hallucination becomes weak. Why would so many unrelated cultures hallucinate beings with helmets, visors, and tubes? The simplest explanation is observation. And the simplest conclusion is that early humans saw something they could not replicate, something far beyond their technological capabilities. And instead of inventing new forms of art to symbolize these beings, they drew what they saw with raw honesty. The more you explore ancient sites, the more one truth presses upward. Humanity's oldest memories are not about hunting, or gathering, or building shelters. They're about contact. Sometime in deep prehistory, something descended from the sky, and the memory of that event became the bedrock of every civilization that followed. And that brings us to a question mainstream history cannot answer. Why do the oldest structures on Earth appear to be the most advanced? Why does the precision of stoneworking, astronomical alignment, and geographical planning degrade over time instead of improving? In the Andean highlands, ruins like Tiwanaku and Pumapunku show stone blocks cut with tolerances so tight that modern machines struggle to replicate them. The drill holes in these blocks show spiral grooves consistent with high-speed rotary tools, thousands of years before metal existed in the region. The blocks interlock in ways suggesting pre-designed templates, as if they were manufactured, not carved. The H-shaped blocks, iconic in their precision, display angles accurate to fractions of a degree. These structures lie near Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, where the Inca said Viracocha emerged after a great flood. The Inca never claimed to have built these sites. They said they inherited them from a race that came before, a race of sky beings. Further south, in Nazca, the famous lines stretch for miles, forming geometric figures, animals, and perfectly straight paths across the desert floor. Some lines run so straight that modern surveyors are baffled by their accuracy. The Nazca people supposedly created them using stakes and simple tools, yet some lines stretch across miles of uneven terrain while retaining perfect alignment. Certain shapes can only be recognized from the air. The most striking figure, the so-called Nazca astronaut, appears to show a being with a large helmet, round eyes, and a raised hand. Was it symbolic, or a record of someone who appeared to come from above? Even in Egypt, where the pyramids receive endless attention, there are anomalies modern engineers cannot explain. The Serapeum of Saqqara contains massive granite boxes weighing up to 80 tons, carved to tolerances of thousandths of an inch, polished inside and out, and stored in tunnels carved with similar precision. No one knows their purpose. The Egyptians left no explanation. The granite was transported from Aswan, hundreds of miles away, and the boxes show machining marks consistent with tools not available in the Bronze Age. The simplest explanation is that the Egyptians inherited these structures or had assistance from someone with technological capability far beyond their own. Patterns like this force you to confront an uncomfortable idea. Humanity may have forgotten more than it ever learned. Entire chapters of our story might be missing, washed away by floods, erased by shifting coastlines, buried beneath deserts, or overwritten by newer civilizations that believed they were the first. And through that amnesia, a single thread remained, a memory of beings from the sky, Every continent tells the same story. The details vary, but the structure never changes. The sky opened. Tall or strange beings descended. They brought knowledge. They guided humanity. They warned of cycles of destruction. They left, and they promised to return. Over thousands of years, these memories evolved into myths. Myths became religions. Religions became histories. But the original truth remained embedded in stone, in alignments, in architecture, in rituals, in oral traditions that refused to die. The world is full of artifacts that shouldn't exist, knowledge that shouldn't have been known, ruins that shouldn't have been built, and stories that shouldn't match, yet they do. And when you lay these stories side by side, Hopi, Dogon, Sumerian, Egyptian, Inca, Aboriginal, Polynesian, Mayan, and countless others, you see the same fingerprints pointing upward, the same faces drawn in different pigments, the same warnings etched in different alphabets, the same promise whispered through time. Something came before us. Something taught us. Something rebuilt our world after it fell apart. And the memory of that presence has never entirely disappeared. It lingers in every myth, every ruin, every ceremony that looks toward the sky. The only question that remains is not whether they came, but whether they ever truly left. There is a moment when you stare at enough ancient ruins, read enough old myths, and walk through enough silent stone corridors that the world you thought you understood begins to fracture. History stops feeling like a straight line and becomes something looping, broken, and uneven, full of sudden spikes of brilliance and unexplained collapses. Every civilization seems to rise too fast and fall too completely, as if something behind the scenes pushed humanity forward, then retreated, leaving people to stumble in the dark until the next intervention. The pattern is so consistent that it starts to feel like a rhythm, a pulse woven through time. When you dig into that rhythm, the same clues keep emerging. Impossible architecture, inexplicable mathematics, sudden astronomical precision, and stories of teachers who did not come from the earth at all. Nowhere does this pattern become more electric, more detailed, and more unavoidable than in the lands of the ancient Nile. Egypt has always been treated as a miracle, an anomaly where civilization appeared astonishingly early, displaying sophistication that should have required centuries of trial and error. Yet the Egyptians themselves never took credit for inventing the core of their culture. They said their knowledge came from a time before time, the Zep Tepi, the first occasion, when the Netjeru, the Shining Ones, arrived from the sky, shaped the earth, built the earliest temples, and taught humanity the foundations of every art and science. When the first Europeans translated these inscriptions, they assumed they were metaphorical, poetic ways of attributing divine authority to kings. But when you walk through the ruins of the Old Kingdom with your eyes open, the myth starts to feel disturbingly literal. Everything about the earliest Egyptian monuments suggests inheritance, not innovation. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with a precision of 3/60 of a degree, something modern builders struggle to achieve even with satellite tools. Its base, covering 13 acres, varies in length by less than an inch from side to side. The internal blocks are placed so tightly that even a razor blade cannot slide between them. And no one has ever found blueprints, experimental models, or transitional designs that would show how Egyptians developed this engineering skill. Later, pyramids built by the same civilization are crude by comparison, collapsing under their own weight or riddled with structural errors. This reversal, perfected architecture appearing first and degrading over time, suggests the earliest structures were either built with help or copied from much older templates left behind by someone else. Walk down into the stone belly of the Serapeum at Sahara, and the air changes. Massive granite boxes, each weighing between 60 and 80 tons, sit in long tunnels carved with impossible precision. These boxes are too large to fit through the tunnels themselves, meaning the tunnels were carved after the boxes were placed, an engineering nightmare even with modern equipment. The interior surfaces of the boxes are polished to mirror finish, and the corners are perfectly square, accurate to fractions of an inch. No inscriptions decorate them. No burial goods were found inside. There is no clear purpose except the sense that the Egyptians preserved something they inherited, but no longer fully understood. The granite came from quarries hundreds of miles away, and the tooling marks visible under magnification look more like modern machining than Bronze Age chiseling. Every archaeologist who enters the Serapeum leaves knowing in their bones that something about it doesn't fit the official story. Then there is the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. Deep within its crypts, spaces so narrow and hidden that they remained sealed for centuries, carvings show what appear to be elongated glass bulbs connected by cables to a device resembling an insulator or capacitor. Within each bulb is a curved serpent shape, depicted as a type of living energy. Engineers who studied the proportions in the 1990s built working replicas that produced cold plasma glow when connected to simple high-voltage generators. The relief is labeled as bringing light into the darkness. Critics argue symbolism, but the engineering parallels are difficult to dismiss, especially when combined with Egypt's odd obsession with hidden chambers, conductive materials, quartz-rich stone, and vibration-focused construction. Zoom out from Egypt, and the picture becomes even more tangled. Ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt's neighbor across the desert, tells a similar story of sky beings who brought knowledge after a world-ending flood. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki descending in fiery craft, teaching irrigation, writing, and kingship. They said humanity was shaped, refined, and elevated by these beings who acted not as gods but as overseers. Their oldest tablets include mathematical detail that modern scholars still struggle to explain: tables of squares, cube roots, astronomical cycles, and lists of planets we did not rediscover until the age of telescopes. Push west into North Africa, and you find the megalithic alignments of Nabta Playa, located deep in the Sahara. Thousands of years older than Stonehenge, the site includes stone circles aligned to the heliacal rising of Sirius and Orion's belt, key constellations in Egyptian cosmology. The precision of these alignments requires advanced knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over nearly 26,000 years. The builders were supposedly nomadic cattle herders, yet they built an observatory so accurate that its alignments only make sense if the creators were tracking star movements over millennia. Move across the Mediterranean to Malta, and you encounter massive stone temples older than the pyramids, structures built with stone blocks weighing 50 tons, moved without wheels or beasts of burden. The rooms are acoustically tuned to specific frequencies, amplifying chants in ways that resonate physically inside the body. Researchers studying one chamber, the hypogeum, found that sound waves within a certain range vibrate the skull and induce altered states of consciousness. The builders clearly knew about harmonic resonance, something most modern people barely understand. Where did they learn it? The island's oldest myths speak of giants, tall, pale, long-limbed beings who raised the stones before disappearing across the sea. Now jump west across the Atlantic. The Americas preserve their own chapters of this global saga. In Mesoamerica, feathered serpent gods like Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan are described as tall, bearded civilizers who taught mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and morality. They arrived from the east in vessels that shimmered and moved without paddles. They opposed human sacrifice, encouraged peaceful cities, and promised to return. When the Spanish arrived, the Aztec emperor believed they might be the returning gods, not because he was superstitious, but because the prophecy was specific. Pale-skinned, bearded visitors coming from the east in floating temples. The Maya recorded cycles of destruction and rebirth, guided by these sky beings. Their long-count calendar tracked cosmic cycles far beyond their supposed technological capability, aligning perfectly with astronomical data modern science is only beginning to decode. The Maya tracked the movements of Venus with precision rivaling modern observatories. Their codices show diagrams of planetary cycles thousands of years before European astronomers drew similar charts. And their city of Teotihuacan, built centuries before the Aztecs arrived, is laid out as a scale model of the solar system. The Pyramid of the Sun corresponds to the Sun's position, the Pyramid of the Moon to the Moon, and smaller structures align to the orbital spacing of the inner planets. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies a cave coated with mica, a mineral used today as an insulator in high-energy equipment. The mica used there came from Brazil, transported over thousands of miles for purposes archaeology still cannot explain. Why embed radiation-shielding material deep beneath a pyramid unless something powerful, dangerous, or technological occurred there? South America deepens the mystery. The ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku sit near Lake Titicaca, at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level. The air is thin, the landscape harsh, and yet the stonework is unmatched anywhere on Earth. Blocks weighing over 100 tons are cut with such perfect geometry that even modern engineers admit defeat. Drill holes show spiral grooves that require rotary tools spinning at high speeds, tools that did not exist in the region until modern times. Cut surfaces are flat to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Some blocks interlock in configurations resembling manufactured components, not hand-carved stones. The Inca, who ruled the region thousands of years later, openly stated that these were not their works. They inherited them from the First Age, when sky beings walked the land. Legends in the Andes describe Viracocha emerging after a great flood, tall, pale, robed, and radiant. He taught people how to build and how to read the heavens. He raised the sun in the sky, reintroduced agriculture, and commanded the surviving tribes to abandon cannibalism and war. When his work was done, he walked across the Pacific Ocean as if it were solid ground, disappearing over the horizon. His departure toward the west appears in myths from Peru to Chile. In every version, he promises to return when the world reaches another turning point. The echoes of this story resonate with the tales of similar beings across the planet. Teachers who came after catastrophe, raised civilization, and left with a promise of a later reckoning. Journey northward, and you reach the lands of the Hopi, whose stories preserve a lineage older than recorded history. The Hopi say that in the previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, the ant people guided humanity into underground refuges. The Hopi describe these beings with tall, thin bodies, oversized black eyes, and grayish skin, details that align disturbingly well with modern accounts of extraterrestrial contact. They speak of craft that descended like whirlwinds, tools that emitted beams of light, and communication through thoughts instead of speech. They say the ant people brought seeds for the first crops and taught humans how to read the sky. They insisted that another world-ending cycle approaches, and that signs in the heavens will signal the return of those who helped humankind survive. Across the ocean in Australia, the Aboriginal people tell of sky beings who arrived in the dreamtime, shaped the rivers and mountains, and taught laws that govern human behavior. The Wandjina paintings are among the oldest continuous art traditions on Earth, and they depict beings with white faces, large eyes, and radiant halos, strikingly similar to beings in rock art across Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Some of the oldest Wandjina shelters contain layers of pigment beneath the visible art, revealed only through laser scanning. These ancient layers show figures wearing segmented suits and gear that resembles modern protective equipment. The Aboriginal communities insist these beings were real. They were not gods. They were the ones who came before. Closer to Europe, the legends of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland describe luminous beings who descended from the sky in dark clouds that blotted out the sun. They brought weapons of impossible power, tools capable of shaping metal and stone beyond anything local tribes possessed, and knowledge of healing, agriculture, and sacred geometry. They were immortal compared to humans. They arrived suddenly and disappeared just as suddenly. They became the fairies of later folklore, watered down through time. But their original depiction mirrors the global pattern, radiant teachers descending from the sky. When you assemble these stories, Sumerian, Egyptian, Andean, Hopi, Dogon, Aboriginal, Celtic, the similarities are too striking to dismiss. They describe tall beings, luminous or pale, wearing suits or shining garments, descending in craft that roar or glow, teaching skills far beyond the era, intervening after catastrophes, shaping early humanity, and leaving with the promise of return. This is not cultural coincidence. This is inheritance. Even the artifacts left behind reinforce the pattern. Metal clamps at Andean sites are made from alloys requiring temperatures ancient cultures could not achieve. Crystal spheres in Aboriginal territories ring like bells when struck, suggesting engineered mineral structures. Stone spheres in Costa Rica appear mathematically perfect, using knowledge beyond the region's known capabilities. Carved stones in Peru depict humans interacting with dinosaurs, performing surgeries, and observing stars with tools that resemble telescopes. Some have oxidation layers indicating age far beyond modern forgery. In Egypt, tool marks on granite blocks show uniform saw blade scoring, something only possible with controlled rotary cutting. In India, the ancient city of Dwaraka lies submerged beneath the ocean, with stone blocks cut so cleanly that underwater archaeologists compare them to laser-cut surfaces. Every piece of evidence, mythological, architectural, astronomical, geological, points upward. The sky is the source, the same story, told in 100 languages, across 1,000 generations, encodes a truth humanity has forgotten. We were not alone in our beginnings, and the deeper you follow that truth, the more the present moment begins to feel like the continuation of a cycle, not the end point of a story. The ancient teachers may not have vanished. They may simply be waiting. The further you push into the puzzle of ancient civilizations, the more the timeline fractures into something that feels less like progress and more like recovery, like humanity kept emerging from the wreckage of forgotten ages, struggling to rebuild knowledge it once held in its hands. In ruins scattered from the Andes to the Himalayas, you find the same imprint again and again: engineering that appears too early, mythology that remembers too clearly, alignments too precise, and warnings too dire to be dismissed as coincidence. It is almost as if the ancients were whispering through stone, trying to tell us that the world we know today is only the latest iteration of a cycle far older and more violent than textbooks admit. And among these whispers, one region rises like a colossal monument to forgotten genius: the high plateaus, jungles, and volcanic landscapes of Mesoamerica and South America, where civilizations carved their knowledge into stone and built cities that still defy modern understanding. Long before Europeans ever set foot in the New World, the people of these continents had constructed some of the most mathematically advanced and astronomically aligned monuments on Earth. They tracked Venus cycles with precision rivaling modern observatories. They designed pyramids that produced acoustic phenomena so exact they behave like engineered instruments. They built cities whose layouts mirrored star constellations, not metaphorically, but with a precision that suggests direct, continuous sky observation over thousands of years. And at the heart of their stories stands the same figure repeated under different names: a tall, light-skinned, bearded teacher who arrived from the sea or descended from the sky, carrying knowledge that would ignite entire civilizations. Among the Maya, this figure appears as Kukulkan; among the Aztec as Quetzalcoatl; among the Toltec as Topiltzin; among the Olmec as a mysterious traveler whose face still lingers in the colossal basalt heads, carved with features unlike any found in local populations. And throughout the Inca world, he is Viracocha, the one who walks on water, shapes mountains, and restores humanity after catastrophe. Though separated by time, language, and geography, these cultures describe him in ways so similar it becomes impossible to ignore. He is always tall, always pale or radiant, always bearded, always robed, always carrying a staff or bundle of knowledge, always opposed to blood sacrifice, and always departing with a promise to return. Even more troubling is the frequency with which he is depicted alongside beings of similar form, or in vehicles that emit smoke, sound, or blazing light. When you walk into the ruins of Teotihuacan, north of modern Mexico City, it's impossible not to feel the gravity of something older than written history. The Avenue of the Dead stretches in a straight line for miles, ending at the massive Pyramid of the Moon, while the Pyramid of the Sun dominates the center with a mass so huge it rivals the Great Pyramid of Giza. The alignment is not random. The entire city forms a precise model of the solar system when viewed from above. Distances between major structures correspond to orbital distances of planets. The Pyramid of the Sun sits on a cave, modified and expanded into a complex chamber coated with mica. a mineral with radiation-shielding properties used in modern electronics and spacecraft. That mica was transported from Brazil, more than 2,000 miles away, for reasons that still defy analysis. There was no practical benefit for a ceremonial site, unless the purpose was technological, not ritualistic. The acoustic design of these structures is even stranger. Clap your hands in front of the temple of Quetzalcoatl, and you hear a chirping echo identical to the call of the Quetzal bird, sacred to the civilization. The effect is so precise it cannot be accidental. Sound waves bounce off the stone in a way that requires advanced knowledge of resonance, geometry, and spatial acoustics. The Maya used similar tricks at Chichen Itza, where the Pyramid of Kukulkan produces an echo that sounds like a serpent's hiss, and the ball courts amplify whispers across enormous distances. These features reveal a society that understood sonic engineering, something typically attributed to modern architecture, yet perfected ages ago by people with no written tools of mathematics. Behind all the marvels of Mesoamerica lies a scarred landscape filled with evidence of sudden collapse, a civilization that flourished with stunning knowledge of the stars, seasons, and mathematics disintegrated rapidly. Cities were abandoned. Forests swallowed pyramids. Writing systems vanished. Myths describe skyfire, famine, celestial upheavals, and the withdrawal of divine teachers. Many cultures believed they lived in the last age of humanity, an era destined to end and begin again in cosmic cycles. Their calendars reflect this worldview. The famous Maya long count didn't predict the end of the world. It marked the completion of a cycle and the beginning of another, the same pattern found in Andean and Hopi traditions. Travel further south into the Andean highlands, where the thin air burns your lungs and the sunlight cuts sharply through the sky, and you reach the ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. Two sites so enigmatic that even modern engineers approach them with disbelief. The stones at Pumapunku look as though they were stamped, molded, or machined rather than carved. They contain drill holes with perfect symmetry, internal angles sharper than metal tools should allow, and surfaces polished to mirror-like smoothness. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons, formed from andesite, a stone harder than steel. There is no clear method by which ancient hands could have shaped them, and no local tradition claims responsibility. The Aymara people, whose ancestors lived in the region, say these structures were built in a forgotten age by giants or sky beings using tools that could soften stone like clay. They speak of Viracocha descending after a great flood, teaching the survivors how to rebuild, and commissioning the construction of these monumental sites. Legends describe Viracocha as radiant, dressed in white, with a flowing beard and features unlike local populations. He brought laws, agriculture, and astronomy. He commanded the people to abandon violence and cannibalism. He traveled with companions who appeared powerful and otherworldly. And when his work was complete, he walked across the Pacific, disappearing over the horizon while promising to return. The myth echoes across the Andes, from the shores of Lake Titicaca to the valleys of Ecuador and the deserts of Chile. It resonates with Sumerian myths of sky beings descending after a flood. It aligns with the Egyptian Zep-Tepi, and it parallels the Maya stories of bearded teachers from the east. Deeper in the Andean world, pre-Inca ruins like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu display masonry so tight that even a modern razor blade cannot slide between the stones. Walls curve in seismic-resistant patterns that modern engineers still admire. Some blocks fit together like puzzle pieces, locking into place with geometric precision. Others have bulbous nubs, referred to as tired stones in Quechua, which appear to be lifting points or remnants of a lost construction technique. Many blocks show magnetic anomalies or contain metals not native to the region. Some scholars believe these features indicate a form of geoengineering that used sound, heat, or unknown substances to manipulate stone. Local legends support this, describing a sacred plant resin capable of softening rocks. A Peruvian chemist claimed to have reproduced a similar effect in the 20th century using a unique combination of organic acids, though the exact formulation remains elusive. The Nazca lines add another layer of strangeness. These massive geoglyphs etched into the Peruvian desert include straight lines miles long, massive animal figures, geometric symbols, and shapes that only make sense from the air. The lines remain perfectly preserved because the desert receives almost no rainfall. Ancient builders removed the top layer of dark, iron-rich pebbles to reveal the lighter soil beneath, creating paths visible for miles. Some believe the lines were astronomical markers or ritual pathways. Others argue they map underground water sources, guided by ancient knowledge of hydrology. But the oldest theories suggest the lines served as landing markers for sky beings, a memory distorted into myth over generations. One figure, dubbed the Nazca astronaut, depicts a being with round eyes and a helmet-like head, waving or signaling, another echo of global imagery. Moving north again, the ancient city of Caral in Peru predates the pyramids of Egypt by nearly 1,000 years. It contains large step pyramids, sunken plazas, and sophisticated design principles despite having no evidence of warfare, weapons, or fortifications. Its layout suggests immense knowledge of geometry, solar alignments, and acoustics. It also contains massive quipus, knotted cords used for record-keeping. Some researchers speculate that Caral preserved knowledge passed down from a much older civilization that survived cataclysmic events before re-establishing advanced culture in the Andes. Across the ocean, on Pacific islands like Easter Island and Micronesia, ancient civilizations built massive stone structures aligned to celestial events, and spoke of ancestors who arrived in starships or sky canoes. The Moai statues of Easter Island face inward, not outward, as if guarding something or overseeing the land, each with features that echo the elongated heads and massive eyes seen in South American art. The oral traditions describe the arrival of sky beings who taught the people how to navigate using the stars. They departed with a promise to one day return from the sky. What ties all these regions together, Mesoamerica, the Andes, the Pacific Islands, is not just myth, but the presence of structures and knowledge that should not exist at the times they appeared. These civilizations all experienced sudden bursts of advancement after long periods of stagnation. Their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering did not develop gradually. It arrived, seemingly all at once. And rather than claim the progress as their own, these cultures attributed it to beings who came from above. But the most unsettling evidence isn't in the myths or the structures. It's in the astronomical alignments that point to a level of observational precision requiring thousands of years of records. Nearly every ancient culture charted the precession of the equinoxes, a 25,172-year cycle caused by Earth's axial wobble. This cycle is almost impossible to detect without long-term observation. Yet the Maya, Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, and Andean cultures all encoded it. Some carved it in stone, others embedded it in myth. The zodiac systems of multiple cultures align with this cycle, suggesting a global inheritance of sky knowledge. In Mesoamerica, the Dresden Codex contains hyper-accurate eclipse tables and Venus cycles. In the Andes, the Sun Gate of Tiwanaku encodes celestial information that only makes sense if the builders tracked movements of celestial bodies over millennia. In Egypt, temple alignments match star positions from thousands of years before the temples were supposedly built. In India, ancient Vedic texts describe celestial mechanics using terminology comparable to modern astrophysics. How did isolated civilizations on opposite sides of the world all achieve the same rare understanding of long-term cosmic patterns? The mainstream answer is coincidence or long-term oral tradition. But oral tradition does not survive unbroken for tens of thousands of years without distortion. And the mathematical precision required to track precession demands stable observation points, instruments, and recording systems, things not found in supposed early civilizations. The more you examine the evidence, the more it suggests that the ancients did not discover precession. They inherited the knowledge from a civilization that existed long before the catastrophes that reset the world. Or perhaps the knowledge came from beings who watched the sky from above, not below. What emerges from this global web of ruins, myths, and alignments is a story humanity seems determined to forget. A story of cycles, catastrophes, teachers, and resets. A story of intervention, guidance, and withdrawal. A story encoded in stone and preserved in memory, whispered by elders across continents but ignored by modern scholars. A story that suggests the most extraordinary chapters of human history took place long before writing was invented. And perhaps the most haunting part is that these chapters do not belong to the past alone. Many of these cultures believed the teachers would return, not as metaphors, but as literal beings descending from the sky when the world entered another turning point. They built their calendars around these cycles. They watched the stars for signs. They believed humanity was being observed, judged, and prepared. The more you follow the patterns, the more it feels as if we are living in one of those turning points now. The skies are more active than ever. Ancient alignments are becoming relevant again, and the timelines of prophecy, myth, and celestial cycles converge with uncanny precision. Whether humanity is ready for what comes next is another matter entirely. The deeper you descend into the labyrinth of forgotten origins, the more the ancient world stops feeling like a distant era and begins to resemble a shattered mirror. Each shard reflecting a different piece of a story too large to fit into one place. Everywhere you look, there are hints of a world older than history, a world where knowledge came not from trial and error, but from instruction, from encounters, from memories of luminous visitors whose presence reshaped everything they touched. The ruins whisper it, the myths shout it, the alignments carve it into the sky itself. And if you keep following these whispers long enough, you eventually reach the holy mountain ranges of Asia, where some of the most detailed and disturbing accounts of sky beings are preserved not as superstition, but as spiritual history. In the Himalayan region, Nepal, Tibet, northern India, vast religious traditions hold a quiet, consistent thread about beings descending from the heavens. These traditions are layered with philosophy, but beneath that philosophy runs the unmistakable pulse of contact. Ancient Buddhist texts describe celestial teachers descending on beams of light, inhabiting bodies not born of human mothers, and teaching cosmic cycles that mirror the precession tracked by the Maya, Egyptians, and Sumerians. Tibetan legends speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom accessible only to those with the right spiritual frequency, ruled by beings who arrived from the sky in vehicles described as shining chariots. Hindu scriptures refer to vimanas, flying craft powered by mysterious energy sources, capable of vertical ascent, long-distance travel, and weapons that resemble modern descriptions of laser beams and plasma bursts. These texts were not metaphorical stories for entertainment. They were technical descriptions written in an era when flight should have been impossible. Take the Mahabharata, one of the world's oldest epics. It describes wars fought between celestial beings using weapons that behave exactly like nuclear detonations. One passage details a blast so bright it was like the light of 1,000 suns rising at once, a phrase identical to Robert Oppenheimer's reflection upon witnessing the first atomic explosion at Trinity. The text speaks of warriors who rode in sky chariots that could make the earth shake when they rose, who fired projectiles that left burned earth and malformed survivors. Another passage describes a weapon that caused hair and nails to fall out, classic signs of radiation poisoning. These aren't fairy tales. They are eyewitness descriptions transformed into epic poetry. The weapons are categorized with alarming specificity. They have names, functions, tactical uses, and they appear in texts that predate modern science by thousands of years. Further south in India, the Vedas expand this story. They describe devas, shining beings, descending in vehicles powered by mercury engines, capable of maneuvering in all directions. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a medieval Indian treatise on architecture preserved from older oral traditions, includes what appears to be a manual for constructing a flying craft. It explains propulsion, steering, and the need for heat-resistant materials. Critics argue misinterpretation, but the language is shockingly literal. It reads like a technical document disguised as myth. China adds its own chapters to this global narrative. Ancient Chinese texts speak of dragons, but not as reptiles. The earliest descriptions portray them as long, metallic, luminous beings that descended from the sky with a thunderous roar. In the Zhou dynasty, historical records describe the Yellow Emperor arriving in a flying craft that glowed and spun. He ascended in the same craft when his work was complete. The Chinese character for dragon evolved over time, losing its original mechanical connotations as myth swallowed history. Even Confucius wrote of encounters between sages and beings who came down in radiant vehicles. Across Southeast Asia, from Indonesia to Vietnam, legends describe sky serpents, star people, and luminous beings who brought agriculture, mathematics, and weaving. On the island of Java, the ancient Borobudur temple aligns with star positions and encodes a cosmic map tracing the soul's journey through multiple realms. Its builders claimed guidance from visitors who came not from any earthly kingdom. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat's astronomical precision exceeds anything expected from a medieval kingdom. Its layout mirrors the Draco constellation as it appeared thousands of years before construction. The Khmer legends speak of Devaraja, god-kings, descended from celestial beings who mated with humans to create hybrid rulers capable of bridging two worlds. Move west toward the Middle East, and you encounter the Yazidi, whose sacred texts describe Melek Taus, a radiant being who descended from the sky to shape humanity and teach forgotten laws. Their oral traditions speak of cycles where the world falls into darkness, only to be renewed by beings who return from the heavens. Scholars try to force these stories into religious frameworks, but the details resist such confinement. Melek Taus is described as luminous, powerful, winged, not in the sense of a feathered angel, but a being of light who moves between realms in a blazing form. All these threads, Hindu, Buddhist, Chinese, Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern, speak of flying craft, luminous beings, catastrophic weapons, and knowledge transmitted from the sky. These traditions do not originate from each other. They arose in distinct cultures, separated by geography and time, and yet the descriptions agree with eerie precision. If you step back and look at Asia as a whole, the patterns sharpen. Advanced metallurgy appears early in India and Nepal, with iron pillars that resist corrosion for thousands of years, a metallurgical feat modern engineers still study. The Delhi iron pillar, for example, remains nearly rust-free after 16 centuries of exposure. Its composition suggests a deep understanding of phosphorus and slag, something historians claim ancient smiths discovered by accident. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if knowledge of durable metallurgy was inherited from a civilization wiped out long before written history? Ancient Sanskrit texts describe cities floating in the sky, beings capable of teleportation, and weapons that could destroy entire armies without leaving physical traces. Modern scholars dismiss these as allegories, yet when you compare the descriptions to modern technology, lasers, drones, nuclear blasts, aircraft, the parallels become too precise to ignore. If these texts were purely symbolic, they would not include details like thermal effects, shock waves, or radiation poisoning. Now leave the mountains and follow the Silk Road westward into Persia. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest religions, describes Ahura Mazda arriving in a radiant craft. The prophet Zoroaster is said to have encountered luminous beings who showed him visions of cosmic order. These beings are described as having glowing bodies and technology so advanced it appeared supernatural. Zoroastrian texts speak of cycles of destruction and renewal, the same themes found in Maya, Hopi, Hindu, and Sumerian cosmology. Across the Middle East, stories of jinn, beings made of smokeless fire, appear repeatedly. Modern interpretations paint them as spirits, but early descriptions portray them as beings of energy, capable of moving between realms, manipulating physical matter, and appearing in luminous forms. Jinn are said to inhabit parallel dimensions, entering our world through specific frequencies, echoing modern theories of interdimensional contact. These stories came from desert tribes who had no scientific frameworks, yet they described energy-based beings with shocking accuracy. Travel further north into Siberia, and you find the Buryat, Yakut, and Evenki tribes, preserving myths of sky spirits who arrived in fireballs, taught survival techniques, and vanished into the heavens. Shamans of these tribes use drums painted with diagrams of flying craft, realms beyond Earth, and beings who travel between them. Their cosmology includes a sky world, an underworld, and a middle realm, a structure mirrored in the belief systems of the Maya, Egyptians, and Norse. But Asia holds one of the most perplexing clues of all: its megaliths. Scattered across India, Japan, Korea, Kyrgyzstan, and Mongolia are thousands of ancient stone monuments aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and star movements. Some weigh hundreds of tons. Some incorporate stones transported over impossible distances. Others encode mathematical constants that should not have been known, like pi, the golden ratio, or the precession of the equinoxes. The Korean dolmen fields contain megaliths so large that modern cranes struggle to lift them. Japanese ruins like the Yonaguni Monument lie underwater, carved with right angles and terraces resembling an ancient city submerged after the last ice age. If Yonaguni predates the floods, it could be evidence of a lost coastal civilization erased by rising seas. Then there is Baalbek, in modern Lebanon, a site so massive, so ancient, and so inexplicable that it defies every category of human construction. At Baalbek's foundation lie the trilithon stones, 3 limestone blocks, each weighing around 800 tons. Nearby sits an even larger monolith, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons. These stones were cut, transported, and positioned with impossible precision. Even modern equipment would struggle to move them. Yet they form the base of a platform upon which later civilizations built their temples. The Romans added columns and ornamentation, but the foundations, those colossal stones, were ancient long before Rome existed. Local legends say they were placed by giants who descended from the sky. Ancient texts describe them as part of a landing platform used by sky beings. Modern historians claim the stones were moved using manpower and simple tools. But no experiment has ever reproduced such a feat. The quarry sits uphill from the platform, not downhill. Dragging blocks that large uphill without advanced machinery requires technology humanity supposedly lacked. And the precision of the cuts suggests techniques more aligned with machining than manual hammering. Across the Arabian Peninsula, you find petroglyphs depicting beings in helmets, with round heads and elongated limbs, descending from objects that emit beams. Some carvings show craft identical to those in ancient Europe and Australia. These images are thousands of years old, carved by nomadic tribes who wandered the desert without written language. Why would they carve beings wearing helmets and suits if they had never seen such things? The answer threads its way through all of Asia. They were recording what they witnessed. The deeper you explore, the more Asia transforms from a region of myth into a reservoir of memory. Every culture remembers the same broad themes: skyborne teachers, catastrophic wars involving weapons of devastating power, flying craft, luminous beings, and cycles of destruction and rebirth. These stories carry the fingerprints of something real, something global, something consistent, something so ancient that its remnants barely survived the collapse of earlier worlds. The ruins echo this truth. So do the star maps carved into cave ceilings. So do the alignments encoded in temples. So do the metallurgical anomalies that shouldn't exist. So do the flood myths that saturate every ancient text from the Himalayas to Mesopotamia. So does the uncanny overlap between Asian myths and those of the Americas, Africa, Europe, and Oceania. And as you look closer at how these myths describe celestial events, something else begins to surface. Something unnerving. Many ancient texts don't just describe cosmic cycles. They describe beings who influence them. Beings who monitor the cycles. beings who intervene when humanity reaches a breaking point. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are prophecies that when humanity enters an age of chaos, beings of light will descend once more to guide the world into a new era. Hindu scriptures speak of Vishnu returning in the form of Kalki, descending on a white horse from the heavens at the end of the Kali Yuga. Zoroastrianism speaks of Saoshyant, a savior who arrives at the end of the cosmic cycle. The Maya awaited the return of the feathered serpent after the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Hopi speak of the true Pahana coming when the fourth world ends. The Dogons say the Nomo will return when Sirius B reaches a specific orbital position. The Egyptians believed the Netjeru would return in a new Zep Tepi. These prophecies aren't random. They synchronize across cultures that never met. They describe a moment when the world resets, when the sky opens again. The more you compare these cycles, the more it resembles a timetable, a schedule followed by beings who operate on scales far larger than our own. These beings aren't gods in the supernatural sense. They are managers, watchers, caretakers, perhaps scientists, explorers, or members of a civilization so advanced that their actions appear divine from the ground. If all of this feels like a conspiracy of myth, consider the most subtle evidence of all, humanity's own evolution. Something happened around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago that triggered a sudden leap in cognitive ability, art, language, symbolic thinking. Geneticists call it the Great Leap Forward. No clear cause exists. Something rewired the human brain. Some researchers have proposed environmental stressors or mutations. But what if the leap was not random? What if it was catalyzed? Ancient texts across Asia describe early humans being corrected, refined, or perfected by sky beings. The Vedas speak of humans crafted and modified by devas. Tibetan traditions speak of humans who interbred with celestial beings. Chinese myths describe emperors descended from star-born ancestors. All of this leads to a single, unavoidable possibility. Humanity itself may be part of the legacy left behind by the sky teachers. Asia's myths, ruins, and sciences suggest not only that the teachers came, but that they came more than once, appearing in waves, influencing different regions at different times, leaving behind cultures that blossomed suddenly and inexplicably. What remains now is the waiting. The texts say they will return when the cycle reaches its threshold, and if the ancient calendars are right, that moment may be far closer than modern minds are prepared to accept. The further this story stretches across continents and epochs, the harder it becomes to cling to the idea that humanity rose alone. Every culture, every ruin, every myth doubles back to the same point. Someone was here before. Someone with knowledge far beyond anything humans should have possessed in those eras. And nowhere does this pattern strike with more intensity than in the islands, coasts, and drowned landscapes that once formed great maritime civilizations. Cultures whose stories are steeped in memories of descendings from the sky, cities swallowed by water, and teachers who moved across oceans as easily as across the land. These places form a shadow network of vanished worlds, pieces of a forgotten global puzzle that began long before the oldest surviving records. They reach deep into human memory, carrying echoes of continents that no longer exist, of kingdoms submerged beneath the waves, and of beings who navigated both sky and sea with technology so advanced it became myth. When you travel into the heart of these maritime traditions, you encounter the same recurring theme. The world was once connected, not just physically, but through a shared lineage of knowledge and guardianship. And that connection was severed by cataclysm, usually by water, fire, or both. In Polynesia, across the thousands of islands that dot the Pacific, stories speak of ancestors who arrived in canoes that glowed and hummed, led by celestial navigators who followed star paths imparted by beings from the sky. These myths don't describe primitive migrations. They describe coordinated voyages guided by advanced astronomical knowledge. Polynesians could navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, relying on star charts stored in memory, wave reading, cloud patterns, and celestial markers. Their mastery of the sea remains unmatched today, and they attribute the origin of this knowledge to those who came from the sky, a phrase repeated in chants and genealogies across multiple archipelagos. In Hawaii, legends tell of Cain and Lono, radiant beings who descended atop pillars of cloud and light. They brought laws, agriculture, and cosmology. They taught the people how to track the stars, how to build double-hulled canoes capable of long-distance travel, and how to interpret signs in the heavens. Cain is said to have returned to the sky using the same beam of light that delivered him. Lono arrived in a floating island, an object described in chants as metallic, brilliant, and capable of controlling the winds. When Captain Cook arrived in Hawaii, the islanders mistook his ship for Lono's returning vessel, because it fit the ancient description too closely for comfort. This was not blind superstition. It was memory. Travel west to Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, and the story deepens. Samoan myths speak of Tagaloa, a sky being who shaped the islands and interacted with humans directly. He is described as tall, luminous, capable of flight, and possessing knowledge of the deep sea. He commanded his people to build structures aligned with the sun and stars. In Tonga, the Haiamonga a Maui Trilithon, a massive stone gateway carved from coral limestone, stands aligned to the solstices, functioning as an ancient astronomical calendar. Local legends say it was built by Maui, a powerful being who could control the sky and sea, not a mortal hero. The stones weigh tens of tons, quarried and transported with a precision inexplicable for the era. The alignment is too exact to be ceremonial. It is observational. But the Pacific holds even stranger ruins, sites so enigmatic that their origins have resisted explanation for centuries. Nan Madol, in Micronesia, rises from the ocean like the skeleton of a vanished world. Its basalt columns form walls, canals, and platforms arranged in a grid-like city built atop a coral reef. The construction required tens of thousands of basalt logs weighing up to 50 tons each, quarried miles away and transported by methods unknown. Oral traditions insist the stones were moved by flying dragons or voices of the sky beings, descriptions that resonate with accounts across the ancient world. The site predates written records and appears to be the ceremonial and political center of a vanished kingdom. It is often called the Venice of the Pacific, but its engineering surpasses anything expected from islander societies of the time. It feels less like a city and more like the remnant of a lost civilization, a fragment of something older than the surface story of Pacific history. Further west lies Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, a submerged megalithic complex discovered in the 1980s. Its terraces, pillars, staircases, and geometric patterns appear deliberately carved, not naturally eroded. The ruins sit 25 meters beneath the sea, meaning they were constructed before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. If Yonaguni is man-made, it suggests an advanced coastal civilization existed in Japan during a period traditionally believed to be dominated by hunter-gatherers. Local legends speak of a kingdom that sank beneath the waves, of monks who flew through the sky, and of guardians from the heavens who instructed the early peoples. Though academia resists the narrative, the structure's geometry defies easy dismissal. And when you place Yonaguni alongside Nan-Madol, Easter Island, and South American megaliths, the pattern becomes overwhelming. Easter Island's moai stand watch over the silent cliffs, each a colossal stone sentinel carved with elongated heads, deep-set eyes, and solemn expressions. The statues are over 10 tons each, some much larger, and they were transported miles from the quarry using unknown techniques. Rapa Nui legends say the moai walked into place under the guidance of a powerful priest who invoked mana from the sky ancestors. These ancestors, called the Long Ears, or Sky People, were said to have arrived in flying canoes, taught the islanders construction, astronomy, and agriculture, and then departed suddenly. The moai may not represent chiefs or ancestors in the conventional sense. They may represent those first teachers, immortalized in stone to preserve their memory. Across the Pacific, the remnants of Lemuria and Mu persist as whispers, continents or island networks said to have existed before the Great Floods. Modern scholars dismiss them as fantasy, yet the stories are curiously consistent across Japan, India, Polynesia, and even parts of South America. These legends describe a great civilization wiped out by rising seas, with survivors fleeing to South Asia, the Pacific, and the Americas, spreading knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and sacred geometry. When you compare the megalithic structures from these regions, the similarities in construction techniques become too precise to ignore. Puzzle-fitting stones, acoustic chambers, star alignments, and symbols representing celestial cycles. Move north to the Arctic Circle, and you encounter myths of Hyperborea, an ancient, cold land inhabited by long-lived beings who interacted with early humans before disappearing. Greek writers like Herodotus and Pindar described Hyperboreans as radiant, tall, and technologically advanced, dwelling in a land where the sun shone for half the year. Their stories echo those of Siberian tribes who speak of luminous beings descending from the sky, living among them for generations before leaving. Some accounts describe circular structures in the far north, made from stone, transported across frozen terrain, remnants now buried or eroded beyond recognition. The Arctic was not always frozen wasteland. During earlier interglacial periods, it was temperate and habitable. If a civilization developed there and later migrated south after climate collapse, it could explain numerous legends. Siberian shamans preserve some of the most detailed extraterrestrial narratives on Earth. The Evenki speak of sky people descending in metal spheres. The Yakut tell of beings who lived in underground chambers and flew in flaming chariots. The Buryat describe advanced sky teachers who left behind sacred objects now lost to time. Some remote Siberian regions contain metallic structures, half buried in permafrost, described in 19th century Russian reports as cauldrons or domes. Explorers who visited them reported sickness, headaches, and burned skin. symptoms reminiscent of radiation exposure. Locals avoided the areas, claiming the structures belonged to sky beings who once lived among them. Whether these accounts describe ancient technology or natural geological formations is still debated, but the consistency of the legends is striking. Further west in Europe, the Baltic region preserves memories of beings who descended in glowing craft. Lithuanian, Estonian, and Finnish mythologies speak of sky maidens, celestial smiths, and godlike teachers arriving in flying chariots. The Finnish Kalevala describes a cosmic forge operated by a master craftsman from the sky who created magical artifacts and taught humans agriculture and metalwork. The similarities to Sumerian myths of skyborn craftsmen are uncanny. Northern Europe carries the legend of the Aesir, a race of powerful beings who came from a realm connected to the sky, bringing knowledge of war, governance, and magic. They battled the Vanir, another group of advanced beings, in a conflict described with the same vividness as Indian accounts of celestial wars. Norse mythology treats these beings as gods, yet their descriptions sound more like elite dynasties wielding advanced technology or energy-based weapons. Thor's hammer, for example, behaves less like a hammer and more like a device capable of generating controlled electrical discharges. Odin's ravens resemble surveillance drones, gathering information across great distances. The Bifrost Bridge is described as a glowing arc connecting two realms, an image strikingly similar to depictions of wormholes or energy conduits in modern theoretical physics. Celtic tales offer similar patterns. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann arrived in dark clouds that blocked the sun. They wielded weapons that emitted bright flashes and thunderous explosions. They possessed talismans capable of healing, granting knowledge, or manipulating physical forces. After their defeat, they retreated into the hollow hills, becoming the Eos Sea, beings who lived in parallel realms and occasionally crossed over. This concept of overlapping worlds echoes the multidimensional descriptions found in Hindu, Tibetan, and Middle Eastern traditions. These were not folk tales meant for children. They were the cultural memory of a world where humans interacted with beings from elsewhere. Travel south into the Mediterranean and you reach Crete, home of the Minoan civilization, a maritime culture whose artwork depicts strange, luminous beings, floating discs, and hybrid creatures. The Minoans built palaces aligned with astronomical movements, used scripts we still cannot decipher, and rose suddenly with no clear developmental path. Their mythology includes Zeus descending to impregnate human women, Europa taken by a shining bull from the sky, and technological marvels described as gifts from the gods. When the Minoan civilization collapsed, it did so suddenly and violently, as if wiped out by an external force or natural disaster. The Mediterranean is filled with sunken structures, cities off the coasts of Greece, Italy, and Egypt, some dating back to periods before the rise of classical civilizations. Pavlopatry in Greece and Herakleion in Egypt show sophisticated urban planning, harbor infrastructure, and megalithic construction submerged after rapid sea level rise. These cities prove that advanced coastal civilizations existed before the ocean swallowed them, civilizations whose remnants are only now being rediscovered through underwater archaeology. All these fragments, Polynesian myths, North Atlantic legends, Baltic cosmologies, European epics, Mediterranean ruins, begin to fit together into a single, sweeping idea. Humans once lived in a world where the boundaries between sky, sea, and earth were blurred by the presence of beings who possessed capabilities far beyond anything recorded in conventional history. As you move inland, away from the coasts, into the river valleys of Europe and the Near East, the story shifts but remains consistent. Megalithic sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, Newgrange, Göbekli Tepe, and Karahan Tepe align with solstices, equinoxes, and star cycles. Their stones ring with hidden acoustics. Their chambers amplify sound and manipulate light in ways that feel engineered, not accidental. Some encode celestial patterns suggesting their builders tracked precession thousands of years before Greek astronomers discovered it. These sites form a global web of ancient observatories, nodes of a forgotten network that connected humanity to the sky. The deeper you sink into this web, the more it begins to look like humanity's early teachers mapped the world in stone. They drew celestial grids across continents. They erected temples along energy-rich fault lines. They left behind markers aligned to the stars, as if trying to prepare future generations for something they knew would come again. And that something echoes through every prophecy, from the Hopi to the Vedas, from the Maya to the Norse sagas. A cycle of renewal and return. The sky beings promised they would come back when the world entered another turning point, when humanity reached the limits of its current cycle, just as it had thousands of years before. Everywhere you look, across oceans, continents, and timelines, the same truth pulses beneath the surface. We are not the beginning of this story. We are the continuation of something far older, something repeatedly interrupted by catastrophe, something guided by forces our ancestors remembered as gods, angels, watchers, or teachers from the sky. And if the ancient cycles are right, the next chapter is already approaching. When you sift through the ruins, the myths, the carvings, and the stars long enough, a new pattern starts to take shape. One far more unnerving than the simple idea that an ancient, advanced culture once existed. It is the realization that these ancient teachers did not simply arrive, teach, and leave. They intervened at specific moments. They appeared during cycles of collapse. They returned after cataclysms. They left markers, warnings, and calendars aligned to cosmic rhythms that stretch over tens of thousands of years, and they shaped humanity as if we were part of a long-term project, one that spans epochs, continents, and resets. To understand that project, you have to follow the thread that winds through the world's great catastrophes, because that is where their fingerprints become the clearest. Every civilization on Earth carries the memory of world-ending disasters: floods, fires, plagues, ice, skyfire, darkness, and renewal. These stories are not vague metaphors. They are specific, detailed, consistent, and they all point to the same timeline, a series of cosmic or environmental catastrophes that nearly wiped out humanity. What modern science calls the Younger Dryas impact event, when comet fragments slammed into Earth around 12,800 years ago, aligns almost perfectly with flood myths across cultures. Geological layers show molten glass, soot, burned biomass, and chemicals consistent with extraterrestrial impacts. This was not a localized disaster. It was a global trauma. And yet, immediately after that destruction, advanced knowledge blooms across the world as if it were planted. Many researchers treat this as coincidence. But the ancient stories say something different. The sky beings returned after the world burned. They came to save what remained. They guided survivors into caves, mountains, and underground cities. They reintroduced agriculture, astronomy, architecture, mathematics. They rebuilt the world's knowledge from the ashes, and then they vanished again, leaving behind the first seeds of the civilizations we know today. Nowhere is this memory more vivid than in Anatolia, where Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the oldest megalithic sites ever discovered, stand like monuments built by hands that remembered a world before the flood. Their creators carved animals that died out at the end of the Pleistocene. They aligned their structures to star patterns as they appeared during the Younger Dryas. And the sites were intentionally buried, preserved like a time capsule for a future generation. Why would hunter-gatherers go to such extraordinary lengths to bury their origins? Because they knew the world was about to reset again. The burial suggests foresight, knowledge of cycles. To understand these cycles, you have to look at the stars the ancients obsessed over: Sirius, Orion, Pleiades, and the galactic center. These weren't decorative choices. They were cosmic markers used to track precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over nearly 26,000 years. Civilizations that were supposedly primitive tracked this cycle with accuracy modern science only confirmed recently. The Maya built entire calendars around it. The Egyptians aligned pyramids to Orion's belt as it appeared in a former sky age. The Dogon predicted Sirius B's orbit without telescopes. The Hindu Yuga cycles align with this rhythm. The Hopi speak of 4 previous worlds destroyed when Earth realigned with the heavens. This global fixation on cosmic timing reveals the heart of the ancient project. Humanity was being prepared, warned, and guided through repeating cosmic cycles that brought destruction. The sky beings were not random visitors. They were managers responding to predictable catastrophes, guardians who intervened when humanity was most vulnerable. Some of the clearest evidence of these cycles lies in South Asia and the Middle East. Ancient Indian texts describe massive wars fought with weapons that behave exactly like modern nuclear detonations. The Mahabharata speaks of the Brahmastra, a weapon that produced blinding light, firestorms, and ash that contaminated the land. Survivors suffered hair loss, vomiting, and blistering skin, classic radiation symptoms. Archaeological studies in Mohenjo-Daro found skeletons with radiation levels far above background, fused pottery, and structures melted into glass-like surfaces. Something extraordinary happened there, something powerful. But the Mahabharata also says these weapons were used before the flood. It describes cities floating in the sky, aerial battles, and interference from celestial beings who oversaw human conflicts. The texts warn that such weapons were banned by the sky teachers after catastrophic misuse. If true, it suggests ancient humans received knowledge far beyond their maturity, and were forced to surrender or lose it after nearly destroying themselves. Travel west into Mesopotamia, and you find similar warnings. The Sumerians wrote that advanced beings brought order after a flood caused by celestial misalignment. The Anunnaki, according to their records, rebuilt the world and reset human kingship. They taught agriculture, writing, and law. But they also warned of cosmic cycles, cycles that would return and reshape the world. Some inscriptions speak of the great time when the stars fall from their places, aligning eerily with modern theories of comet showers triggered by Earth's passage through cosmic debris fields. Egypt mirrors this story. The priests wrote that the Zep Tepi, first time, ended with flood and fire, and that the Sky Guardians returned to restore order. The pyramids, they said, were built according to instructions left by earlier beings. The calendar system they used traced back to a pre-cataclysmic era, not the time of the pharaohs. The Dendra zodiac shows signs of lost sky knowledge, constellations in positions not matching recorded history, but matching the sky over 10,000 years ago. Even the Hebrews preserved a pale reflection of this cosmic cycle. The Book of Enoch describes watchers descending, teaching forbidden knowledge, and being punished after corrupting humanity. It outlines a cosmic order linked to star cycles. It warns of a future time when the watchers return. The Hebrew word Elohim, often translated as God, is grammatically plural, meaning the powerful ones of the sky. Later theology collapsed them into one figure, but the original text suggests a council, not a single deity. Move east to China, and the pattern sharpens again. The Yellow Emperor is said to have descended in a metal craft, taught medicine, astronomy, and governance, and ascended in the same craft. Ancient Chinese records describe sky dragons not as reptiles, but as shimmering machines. They describe cosmic cycles ending in floods and celestial alignments. Chinese cosmology divides time into repeating ages, each ending in upheaval. These cycles match those of the Maya, Egyptians, and Hindus. In Japan, the Kojiki describes heavenly beings descending to shape the islands. In Korea, myths tell of sky kings who ruled before humans. In Southeast Asia, ancient texts speak of a world destroyed by flood and rebuilt under the guidance of radiant beings. The consistency is overwhelming. What ties all of these stories together is not only the memory of sky beings, but their timing. They always appear after collapse. They always return during transitions. They always warn of cycles. To dig deeper into this pattern, you have to trace humanity's greatest losses, because those are the moments when the teachers re-emerge. The Younger Dryas was only one catastrophe. Others followed. Around 8,200 BCE, the world suffered another abrupt temperature drop. Around 6,000 BCE, rapid sea level rise drowned coastal civilizations. Around 3,200 BCE, a sudden climatic shift triggered the collapse of cultures across the planet. Around 200 BCE, the Bronze Age fell dramatically, empires evaporating without clear cause. Each period of collapse is accompanied by myths of sky beings departing or withdrawing, leaving humans to struggle alone. Each recovery is marked by sudden leaps in technology and culture, as if someone returned to restart the project. But there is a darker thread woven into this story, the idea that not all sky beings shared the same intentions. In nearly every culture, there are tales of benevolent teachers and malevolent rivals. The Sumerians divided the Anunnaki into factions. The Egyptians wrote of battles among the Netjeru. The Greeks spoke of wars in the heavens. The Hindus described divine conflicts with devastating weapons. The Maya recorded sky serpents battling across the sky. These aren't metaphors for weather patterns. They read like geopolitical histories of non-human groups vying for influence over Earth. The more you examine the ruins, the clearer it becomes. Some sites carry the signature of benevolent knowledge: astronomy, healing, agriculture. Others reflect catastrophic power: melted stone, radiation anomalies, vitrified walls. Perhaps there were factions: teachers, warriors, spectators, opportunists. Humanity might have been caught in their crossfire. This idea is reinforced by the presence of hybrid beings in myth: half human, half celestial offspring. They appear in Greek myths as demigods, in Hindu texts as heroes, in Sumerian stories as kings, in biblical accounts as the Nephilim. These beings are described as giants, radiating power, with lifespans far longer than humans. The Sumerian king list records reigns lasting thousands of years before the flood, shrinking dramatically afterward. Genetic studies reveal sudden bottlenecks and bursts of diversity. Something was happening to human DNA during these eras. Then there are the global traditions of underground or hidden civilizations. The Hopi speak of ant people who sheltered humanity during cataclysm. Tibetan Buddhists describe Shambhala, a hidden land of advanced beings. Hindu texts speak of Patala, subterranean realms inhabited by serpentine beings from the sky. Native American tribes speak of star people retreating into mountains. European legends speak of hollow hills where luminous beings lived after leaving the surface world. These stories align with the idea that some of the ancient teachers, or their descendants, never left Earth completely. They moved into inaccessible places, waiting for cycles to turn. If you view humanity as an emerging species monitored by older ones, the pattern becomes logical. They appear during infancy, during crisis, during adolescence, during collapse. They withdraw during stability. They leave clues to prepare the next generation. They imprint knowledge in myth, architecture, and alignment. They embed warnings in calendars. They encode messages in symbols only future civilizations could decode. And now, all those ancient cycles are converging again. Earth's magnetic field is weakening. Climate patterns are destabilizing. Solar activity is rising. Sea levels are shifting. Meteor activity is increasing. We are entering a new precessional alignment, similar to the one that preceded the Younger Dryas. The ancient calendars all point to this era, not a single date, but a window of transformation stretching across centuries. The teachers knew this. They tried to prepare us. Their message echoes through carvings, prophecies, and oral traditions. We will return when the sky aligns, when the cycle turns, when the world stands on the threshold. The threshold is now. Whether they return as saviors, observers, or something more complicated is a question the ancients never answered clearly. But they never said they were gone forever. They said they were watching. They said they would come in the time of great turbulence. And they said humanity would have to choose its path when the sky opened once more. Everything we are discovering, ancient ruins, lost technologies, cosmic cycles, points to the same truth. The story is not over. The project is ongoing. The Watchers are not myths. They are the missing chapter of human history, and the cycle that once brought them here is returning. As you follow the evidence across continents, across ages of forgotten brilliance and eras of ruin, a single truth begins to sharpen like a blade. Humanity's story has always been entangled with forces older, wiser, and far more advanced than our species. The fragments of this story are scattered, etched into cave walls, carved into megaliths, preserved in myth, aligned with stars, and whispered through prophecy. But once you assemble them, the shape they reveal is unmistakable. We are living in the aftermath of interventions, watching the echoes of ancient teachers ripple through time, shaping civilizations long after their departure. And the closer you draw to the present moment, the stranger these echoes become. They do not fade with distance. They grow louder, as if something is returning, circling back. closing a loop that began thousands of years ago. To understand this return, you have to study the places where the old world meets the new, where ancient knowledge overlaps with modern phenomena, where the past bleeds into the present in ways that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. These places are more than archaeological sites. They are thresholds, zones where human history seems to fray, revealing the edges of a different, hidden reality. And nowhere is this threshold more visible than in the global phenomenon of inexplicable structures, electromagnetic anomalies, and modern encounters that mirror ancient descriptions too precisely to ignore. Begin in the deserts of the American Southwest, where tribal nations preserve stories older than the sands themselves. The Hopi speak of sky shields that glowed like the sun, descending on columns of wind. The Zuni describe star people who lived among them before vanishing into the earth. The Navajo recount beings who emerged from the heavens in luminous domes, leaving behind objects that vibrated with strange power. For centuries, these were dismissed as myth. But today, the same region is filled with reported sightings of luminous craft, electromagnetic disturbances, and structures that defy explanation. Sites the U.S. government classifies but refuses to publicly discuss. The Hopi say the ant people will return when the world enters a period of chaos. They describe the sky filling with movement once again. And now, for the first time since ancient memory, that is precisely what is happening. Travel east into the heartland, and you encounter the mound-building cultures, Hopewell, Adena, Mississippian, who constructed earthworks with geometric precision aligned to lunar cycles, solstices, and celestial events. Their myths describe sky beings who taught them agriculture and rituals of balance. The Serpent Mound in Ohio coils in alignment with the summer solstice sunset and contains patterns matching star constellations. Some of these structures encode knowledge of lunar standstills, a complex 18.6-year cycle few modern people even know exists. The tribes do not claim these alignments came from trial and error. They say they were given the knowledge. And in recent decades, aerial phenomena have been repeatedly documented above these ancient sites, as if whatever once guided the builders has not completely abandoned them. Move further south, and you reach the lands once ruled by the Maya. Their calendar, long misunderstood by the modern world, was not predicting the end of time. It was tracking the return of a cosmic alignment they believed marked contact between realms. The long count calendar describes cycles of creation, destruction, and renewal, each associated with the reappearance of beings from the sky. These beings were not metaphors. The Maya described them with specific features: tall, luminous, bearded, possessing knowledge of the stars that humans could not have gathered alone. Their temples and pyramids are aligned to star events that occur across thousands of years, suggesting long-term planning and inherited memory. When researchers scanned beneath some temples, they found liquid mercury, used in ancient cultures to represent the underworld or to create reflective pools mirroring the sky. It is as if the Maya were building gateways between realms, preparing for the moment the sky people would return. The Aztec carried similar memories. They believed Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, would return when a specific celestial alignment reoccurred. That alignment happened in the 20th century, coinciding with a surge in global sightings of unidentified aerial craft. In Peru, the Nazca Lines, once mysterious giant geoglyphs impossible to understand from the ground, now appear eerily similar to landing markers. But the most revealing detail is how the Nazca myths describe the beings who taught their ancestors. Tall, light-skinned, arriving in vehicles that glowed, leaving behind laws, teaching agriculture, and promising to return. Cross the Atlantic, and the same echoes appear. In Africa, the Dogon continue to track the orbit of Sirius B with uncanny precision, claiming their knowledge came from the Nomo, beings who arrived in a spinning craft long before written history. In the past century, Dogon elders predicted cosmic events later confirmed by modern astronomers, such as the existence of Sirius C. If their knowledge was inherited from extraterrestrial teachers, then the ancient connection has never fully severed, because the Dogon insist that the Nomo will come again during a period of global turmoil marked by droughts, floods, and chaos. Travel into the heart of Europe, and the ancient stories sharpen even further. The Norse described the Aesir as sky beings who came from beyond the mortal world. They lived in realms connected by the Bifrost, a glowing arc bridging the sky and earth. The Aesir were not intangible spirits. They wielded weapons and technology capable of altering the environment. They battled rival sky beings. They left Earth after shaping early humans, and they left behind a prophecy. They would return during Ragnarok, the final cycle, when the sky opened and the sun darkened. Modern researchers dismiss this as myth, but the imagery matches ancient global descriptions of cosmic disruptions, solar dimming, atmospheric changes, celestial anomalies. In the British Isles, the Celts preserved stories of the Tuatha De Danann, tall, radiant, powerful beings who arrived in dark clouds and wielded weapons of terrifying brilliance. They were not born of Earth, and after losing a great war, they retreated into hidden realms, waiting for the time when they would rise again. The Celts believed these beings were not gone. They were simply concealed, watching from the shadows, waiting for the cycle to turn. As you travel through the Mediterranean, the remnants of ancient contact grow even more tangible. In Italy, Greece, Turkey, and the islands of the Aegean, myths of gods descending in fire and light fill every page of their oldest texts. Zeus arrived in a glowing object. Apollo descended in a luminous chariot. Athena emerged from the heavens. Hephaestus forged weaponry using tools that resemble advanced machines. The myths of the Olympians read like distorted memories of sky beings whose technology appeared divine to early humans. And beneath the ruins of these ancient cultures lie layers of cities destroyed by sudden cataclysm, fires, floods, earthquakes far beyond normal cycles. Many myths speak of these destructions as punishments or cosmic resets. But what if they were the result of forces not entirely natural? Then there is the legend of Atlantis, a civilization destroyed in a single night of fire and flooding. For centuries, scholars treated Atlantis as pure fiction. But today, geological evidence shows that massive coastal cities could have existed during the last ice age, only to be swallowed by rising seas. Underwater mapping has revealed structures in the Caribbean, off India's coast, off Japan, and along the Mediterranean that could belong to forgotten civilizations. Atlantis may not have been a single city, but a network of coastal cultures wiped out by catastrophic sea level rise. cultures whose survivors carried fragments of their knowledge into places like Egypt, Sumer, and the Andes. The connections among these cultures, their sudden bursts of knowledge, their inexplicable engineering, their memories of sky teachers, suggest Atlantis was not simply human. It may have been the last great synthesis between humans and sky beings, a golden age when both species interacted openly before the catastrophe forced a separation. Follow the story further east, and you arrive in Egypt, where the priesthood wrote of a golden age ruled by the Netjeru, the shining ones who came from the sky during the first time. They built pyramids aligned to Orion. They taught writing and astronomy. They withdrew when humanity fell into chaos. And they left prophecies describing their return when the stars reached specific positions. Egyptian texts describe these beings as physically present, not symbolic. They possess luminous bodies, advanced knowledge, and vehicles that ascend to the heavens. Their departure coincides with global climatic collapse, hinting at a retreat during an age of instability. Move east into Sumer, and the pattern intensifies. The Anunnaki created humans through intervention, taught them civilization, and left behind a warning of future cycles. Their return, according to Sumerian texts, would occur when the great star returns to its place in the heavens, a reference to precession, or perhaps to a celestial body invisible to the naked eye. Even the language used in these myths, plural deities, councils, rulers, laws, resemble descriptions of a structured, organized group rather than a pantheon of metaphors. Cross into Asia, and the same story emerges in different forms. In India, the Yuga cycles describe repeating ages of humanity overseen by celestial beings. At the end of each cycle, Vishnu descends in a physical form. The final avatar, Kalki, arrives riding a radiant sky steed. This imagery mirrors descriptions in other cultures of beings returning in luminous craft during times of upheaval. Hindu texts describe vimanas with mechanical detail, flying vehicles capable of diving underwater, hovering, and emitting destructive beams. These texts also describe wars between sky clans, battles that left cities in ruins. The aftermath of these wars resembles the aftermath of nuclear blasts. In Tibet, the kingdom of Shambhala represents a hidden realm inhabited by advanced beings who will emerge in a time of darkness. Tibetan texts describe these beings arriving in vehicles that shine like suns and moving between worlds through portals. Their presence is a constant reminder that the sky teachers never completely left. They simply withdrew beyond human perception. In China, the legends of sky dragons and heavenly emperors describe luminous beings visiting humanity. The Yellow Emperor's arrival in a glowing craft, his ascension back into the heavens, and his teachings of medicine, governance, and astronomy suggest direct intervention. Ancient Chinese records speak of glowing discs, celestial chariots, and beings with radiant armor. Move into Southeast Asia, and the memory grows even sharper. Khmer legends speak of god-kings descended from heaven. The people of Borneo and Vietnam describe sky serpents and star visitors. Indonesian myths tell of kings who came from the sky and returned in blazing arcs of light. Across all these regions, the message is the same. The sky beings did not disappear. They retreated. They concealed themselves. They waited for something. As the modern world becomes increasingly intertwined with the digital, the cosmic, and the unknown, the ancient stories begin to feel less like tales of the past and more like warnings for the future. Because the final piece of this puzzle is not found in old myths or forgotten ruins, it is found in the skies of the modern era, where sightings of advanced craft have surged in numbers unseen in recorded history. Across the world, governments have quietly declassified footage of vehicles defying physics, accelerating at impossible speeds, making right-angle turns, hovering silently, and disappearing instantly. These objects match ancient descriptions of sky chariots, divine shields, and luminous vehicles. They appear above ancient sites, oceans, deserts, and military zones. They behave with intention, as if observing. They do not communicate openly. They do not intervene, but they do not hide either, not entirely. Pilots describe objects that mimic their movements, accelerate beyond their reach, and vanish without a trace. Navies track craft descending into oceans at impossible speeds. Civilians capture footage of luminous spheres, metallic disks, and objects splitting into multiple parts. These craft move silently, without wings or engines, in ways eerily similar to descriptions in Sumerian, Hindu, Chinese, and Norse texts. If the sky beings were myth, why does modern footage mirror ancient accounts so precisely? The truth may be simpler and more unsettling than anyone imagined. The Watchers never left. They simply withdrew until humanity reached a stage where their return, or reappearance, would trigger a new cycle. Ancient prophecies across cultures predicted a time when the sky would fill with signs, when humanity would stand at the threshold of transformation, when the old world would crumble and a new one would begin. They said the teachers would return during this age, not to rule, not to destroy, but to guide humanity into the next cycle. And now, for the first time in thousands of years, every culture's prophecy aligns with the same era, our own. The solar cycles, the cosmic alignments, the environmental changes, the technological leaps, and the surge in aerial phenomena all match the ancient warnings. We are not witnessing something new. We are witnessing something old coming back into view. The cycle is turning. The sky is waking. The Watchers are drawing near. Humanity stands once again on the edge of a chapter written long before we existed. And the next page is already turning. The deeper you move towards the present, the more the ancient world stops feeling like a distant origin and starts feeling like a prelude, like the opening act of a story still unfolding above us, around us, and through us. The ruins, the myths, the alignments, the cataclysms, the cycles, the sightings, the whispers from remote tribes and ancient priesthoods, all of it forms one continuous thread, a rope of memory stretching from the first fire-lit caves to the glowing screens of the modern age. And if you follow that rope carefully, refusing to look away when it leads into shadows, you eventually reach a place where past and future begin to merge, where forgotten histories echo into the present, and where humanity stands at the precipice of a transformation foreseen thousands of years ago. Every civilization believed it was living in the final age. The Maya, the Egyptians, the Hopi, the Norse, the Hindus, the Sumerians. They all spoke of cycles of destruction followed by rebirth. They warned of times when the sky would fill with signs, when the earth would shake, when the oceans would rise, when fire and ice would battle in the heavens, and when humanity would be forced to confront its origins. They described watchers, teachers, creators, guardians, beings who promised to return when the cycle began again. And now, For the first time since the ancient world burned and drowned, the signs those cultures described are beginning to converge once more. But to understand what we are stepping into, you have to understand the ancient project, the long, patient shaping of humanity that began not in the first cities, but in the first sparks of consciousness. Something nudged early humans forward. Something drove the leap between primitive tribes and symbolic thinkers. Something guided the birth of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture after global collapse. Something pushed civilizations to align their monuments with the sky. Something encoded messages in stone, myth, and mathematics. This something was not a single entity or a single culture. It was a network of teachers, some benevolent, some conflicted, some divided, intervening across epochs, withdrawing and returning. And as you trace their influence, a pattern emerges. Every time humanity reaches a moment of global transformation, technological, environmental, or spiritual, the Watchers become active again. Not openly, not yet, but unmistakably. Look first to the skies, where the ancient story reawakens with modern clarity. In the past century, sightings of craft matching ancient descriptions have increased exponentially. Objects of impossible speed traverse continents in seconds. Luminous spheres hover over oceans for hours. Metallic disks defy gravity and maneuver in ways no human invention can replicate. Triangular craft glide silently above military installations. Cylindrical objects plunge into the sea without splash or turbulence. The beings behind these craft remain invisible, but their presence is undeniable. This isn't fringe speculation. It is documented by governments, recorded by military cameras, tracked by radar, and acknowledged by officials who once dismissed such claims. The Pentagon has publicly confirmed unidentified aerial phenomena that outmaneuver all known technology. Navies have tracked craft entering the ocean at speeds that should destroy any known vehicle. Pilots with decades of experience describe encounters identical to those etched on ancient petroglyphs. Why now? Why, after thousands of years of relative quiet, has the sky come alive again? Because the cycle is turning, just as the ancients warned. To understand this return, you must examine the ancient warnings embedded in myth. The Maya said the end of one era and the beginning of another would be marked by disturbances in the heavens. The Hopi spoke of a blue star emerging when the fourth world ended. The Norse described a time when the sky would open and the trembling of Yggdrasil, the cosmic axis, would signal the return of the gods. The Egyptians spoke of the rebirth of the first time, when the stars realigned and the lords of the horizon descended once more. The Sumerians described a long cycle after which the Anunnaki would revisit Earth. The Dogon pointed to the orbit of Sirius as a marker of return. The modern world is now experiencing celestial anomalies. Rogue comets, sudden solar eruptions, unexplained interstellar objects entering the solar system, geomagnetic weakening, shifting auroras, and increasing meteor activity. These changes mirror descriptions from ancient texts tied to the start of new cycles. And modern technology allows us to observe them in ways ancient cultures could only encode symbolically. The cycle is not folklore. It is astronomical. But celestial signs are only one thread. Another runs deep beneath the earth itself. Across the world, tectonic activity is rising. Earthquakes strike regions long considered stable. Dormant volcanoes awaken. The magnetic field weakens. Poles drift. These shifts match ancient warnings recorded in myths of lost continents and cyclical destruction. The Egyptians wrote of the earth tilting during the Great Cataclysm. The Hopi speak of the earth turning over. The Norse describe the shaking of the world tree. The Maya warn of changes to the world's axis. These ancient metaphors reflect modern geophysics, polar wander, magnetic reversals, crustal adjustments, and climate upheaval. The Watchers knew these cycles. They prepared humans for them. They built monuments to encode the knowledge. And when the cycles turned violent, they intervened. The key question is not whether they will return. It is whether they have already begun. Modern sightings mirror ancient descriptions too precisely to be coincidence. In the Himalayas, luminous craft appear above sacred valleys where Tibetan legends say the sky beings retreated. In Peru, spheres of light appear above Nazca, matching ancient depictions of floating gods. In the deserts of the Middle East, pilots intercept craft identical to those described in Sumerian texts. In Australia, glowing discs appear above the same rock shelters where the Wandjina were painted. Across Africa, villagers record sightings of the Shining Ones, returning to old ancestral sites. Indigenous elders across the world say they are coming back. But this return is not a sudden arrival. It is a phased re-entry, a gradual reintroduction, one calibrated to humanity's growth. The Watchers always operated with precision. They intervened when needed, withdrew when not. Their timing was deliberate. That timing now overlaps with something else: humanity's accelerating technological awakening. For the first time in history, humans can split the atom, reach the moon, decode DNA, build artificial intelligence, communicate globally, and alter the planet's climate. These abilities mark a threshold, a point at which humanity either ascends to a new level of responsibility or collapses under the weight of its own power. Ancient texts predicted this threshold with uncanny accuracy. Hindu scriptures describe the end of the Kali Yuga as a time of technological explosion and moral confusion. Scandinavian legends say humanity will become capable of forging weapons that rival the gods. Hopi prophecies describe spider webs in the sky, roads in the heavens, and talking stones, all of which mirror satellites, aircraft, and digital devices. The Bible warns that knowledge will increase and people will move to and fro across the earth before the return of the Watchers. The Maya described a time of metal birds and earth covered in networks, marking the transition. The ancients weren't speaking symbolically. They were describing the age we are living in. When humanity reaches such a threshold, the Watchers return not to rule, but to observe, to guide, to ensure the cycle does not collapse prematurely. Their presence is becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Governments know this. Military agencies know this. Tribal elders know this. The sky knows this. The earth knows this. But to understand the purpose of their return, you must look at the oldest part of the ancient project, the shaping of human consciousness. From the beginning, the Watchers weren't just building civilizations. They were cultivating minds, expanding awareness, preparing humanity to perceive realities beyond its physical limitations. This is why ancient teachers emphasized meditation, astronomy, geometry, myth, ritual, sound, and energy. They weren't teaching religion. They were teaching perception, methods for tuning human consciousness to higher frequencies. And as modern science advances, it is beginning to rediscover what the ancient world understood intuitively. that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but a field, an interface, something capable of interacting with dimensions the physical senses cannot detect. Quantum physics hints at it. Neuroscience brushes against it. Mystics and shamans have always known it. The Watchers mastered consciousness long before humanity existed. They moved between realms not through physical travel alone, but through shifts in energy and intention. This is why they appear and disappear. This is why they glide silently. This is why they communicate telepathically. This is why their craft bend space. They operate in a layer of reality humanity is only now rediscovering. The final stage of the ancient project is not about technology. It is about awakening. And the return of the Watchers coincides with that awakening. They are not coming to reveal themselves suddenly. They are waiting for humanity to reach a state where contact can occur without collapse, without worship, fear, or war. This is why the modern phenomenon unfolds gradually. They appear to pilots, not presidents, to villagers, not armies, to individuals, not empires. The Watchers are gauging readiness. To understand what comes next, consider the ancient prophecies not as fear-based warnings, but as instructions, guides for navigating the cycle. The Maya said humanity would undergo a shift of consciousness, not an apocalypse. The Hopi said the world would purify itself, and those aligned with truth would survive. The Hindus said Kalki's arrival signals the birth of a new yuga. The Sumerians said the return of the Anunnaki would reset kingship. The Egyptians said the first time would repeat when humanity remembered who it truly was. The Norse said the new world rises after Ragnarok. The Dogon said the Nomo would return to restore balance. The pattern is clear. The cycle ends not in annihilation, but transformation. That transformation has already begun. The Watchers are here, not fully, not openly, but unmistakably. Their presence is a sign that humanity stands at the doorway of the next world age, the next iteration of the ancient project. They have returned to guide, to observe, and to ensure the cycle unfolds as it should. But the final step is not theirs. It is ours. Humanity must decide whether it rises with the new age or falls with the old, whether it embraces the awakening or clings to the illusions that kept it blind for centuries, whether it becomes a participant in the cosmic community or remains isolated in fear. The Watchers did not choose humanity by accident. They saw potential, a spark capable of growing into something extraordinary. And every intervention, every teaching, every cycle of destruction and rebirth has been about tending that spark. Now the flame is ours to carry. The ancient project is reaching its climax. The sky is stirring, the earth is shifting, the cycles are aligning, and the Watchers are returning. Humanity stands on the edge of the next chapter. One written not in forgotten stone or mythic memory, but in the choices we make as the new world dawns. We were never alone in our beginning. We will not be alone in our becoming. And the story that began in the shadows of the first time is ready to unfold again in the light of the next.